Adrian Peterson, 296 rushing yards. Adrian Peterson put together a game against the San Diego Chargers that still reads like an exaggeration. 30 attempts turned into 296 yards and 3 scores, a total that led the day and rewrote the record books. At that moment, it stood as the highest single-setting rushing stats ever recorded in the NFL. Even more jarring is the timing. This came in just his 8th professional appearance, long before most runners settle into rhythm or recognition. There was no extended buildup, no gradual rise, just immediate dominance that forced attention. The afternoon didn't creep toward something historic. It exploded into it. Early on, he broke free for a 64-yard score, setting the tone almost instantly. From there, nothing meaningfully changed on the defensive side. Standard positioning failed repeatedly, and pursuit angles looked off as plays stretched beyond expectation. What made the display so difficult to contain wasn't a single trait. It was the fusion of burst and power. He hit openings before they fully developed, and once he reached open space, separation happened faster than defenders could react. The usual defensive discipline simply couldn't stabilize the situation. As the workload increased, the impact refused to level off. Typically, settings like this rely on one massive breakaway to inflate totals. But that wasn't the case here. Yes, there were long scoring runs, 73, 64, and 40 yards. But what made the yardage overwhelming was everything in between. There was no quiet stretch where things normalized. Every possession carried the same threat level, which is rare in a league built on adjustments and corrections. By the fourth quarter, the objective had shifted. It was no longer about stopping anything outright. It was about damage control. The Minnesota Vikings didn't operate with a dominant aerial attack, forcing spacing advantages. The approach leaned heavily toward the ground, meaning the opposition knew exactly what was coming. Even with that clarity, containment never materialized. There was no deception involved, just repeated execution against a prepared opponent, with the same ending every time. Norm Van Brocklin, 554 passing yards. Norm Van Brocklin produced a number on September 28, 1951, that still hasn't been touched. 554 yards through the air in a single matchup against the New York Yanks. Decades later, with modern rules favoring offense and schemes built to stretch coverage, that total remains at the top. It feels disconnected from reality because of the number itself, but because later eras designed to boost passing yardage still haven't pushed beyond it. The matchup didn't unfold through slow accumulation. It turned into repeated vertical strikes that stretched coverage constantly. The Los Angeles Rams leaned into a deep passing approach that created immediate gains rather than extended drives. Instead of working methodically down the field, possessions flipped instantly with long completions. Defensive alignment at the time couldn't hold up against that kind of spacing, and once momentum started building, there was no consistent response that slowed it. Only 27 completions were needed to reach that total, meaning each successful throw carried significant distance. This wasn't built on volume alone. It relied on sustained downfield success. Receivers consistently found space, coverage broke apart, and every connection reinforced the same pattern rather than correcting it. Another layer comes from how the flow of the contest allowed it to continue. In most situations, once control is established, the approach shifts toward managing the clock. That didn't happen here. The same aggressive mindset stayed in place, allowing outcomes to keep rising without interruption. In an era that should have limited passing totals, everything aligned to create a number that still stands apart. Derrick Thomas, 7 sacks in 1 game, loss. Derrick Thomas delivered a defensive showing in 1990 that should have dictated everything. 7 sacks in a single afternoon against the Seattle Seahawks. It feels disconnected from reality because later eras designed to boost passing yardage still haven't pushed beyond it. From the opening moments, pressure didn't just exist, it consistently turned into finished plays. 1 sack requires timing and execution. Multiple usually signal offensive breakdown. Reaching 7 means every adjustment failed. Quarterback Dave Krieg kept facing the same situation, with Thomas breaking through protection from different alignments and closing space before any recovery could happen. What stands out is how repetitive the final sequence remained. Offenses typically respond by making changes to their protection, calling quicker throws, or shifting the pocket. None of those changes altered what was happening. Thomas attacked from different angles, showing versatility instead of relying on one mismatch. That removed any chance for stabilization and kept the pressure constant. Late in the contest, everything flipped. After dealing with constant disruption, Seattle still found a moment that changed the outcome, a deep touchdown that erased what should have been a controlled finish. That contrast is what defines this showing. A defensive effort that should have sealed everything instead became part of a loss. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Tim Tebow, 316 yards on 10 completions. During a wild card matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers on January 8, 2012, Tim Tebow produced a stat line that doesn't follow normal passing structure. 10 completions turned into 316 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's over 31 yards per completion, a number that breaks the usual relationship between volume and outcome. From the first drive, the pattern was clear. This wasn't a methodical passing approach built on rhythm. Each successful throw created massive field position swings. Pittsburgh's defense, known for discipline, struggled to cope to the timing and spacing of those deep connections. When Tebow connected, it wasn't incremental progress, it was immediate impact. The contrast between limited completions and extreme yardage is what drives how unusual this is. Fewer completions typically restrict total impact. That's how the structure of football works. Here, that relationship completely broke down. Every successful attempt carried disproportionate value, allowing production to spike without needing volume. The defining moment came in overtime. On the very first play, Tebow delivered an 80-yard touchdown to Demaryius Thomas, ending everything instantly. One play decided the entire setting, reinforcing how different this numbers was from conventional quarterback showing. Antonio Cromartie, 109-yard missed field goal return. Antonio Cromartie produced a return during a matchup between the San Diego Chargers and the Minnesota Vikings in 2007 that reached the absolute limit of what's possible. A missed 59-yard field goal turned into a 109-yard touchdown, the longest conversions play in league history. The sequence began as a long field goal attempt near halftime. Instead of ending the possession, the kick fell short and stayed in play. Cromartie caught it deep in the end zone, right at the back line. In that moment, the situation shifted from a failed conversion attempt into an open field opportunity. What followed required more than straight line speed. Navigating through pursuit meant reading blocks, changing direction, and maintaining balance across the entire field. Every yard increased the difficulty because defenders were already moving at speed. Despite that, Cromartie consistently found space and extended the return further than expected. Starting at maximum depth removes any margin for error. Every variable had to align perfectly, from kick placement to coverage gaps to execution. Since 109 yards represents the upper limit under standard field dimensions, this isn't just difficult to surpass, it cannot be exceeded. Jamal Lewis, 295 rushing yards. During the 2003 season, Jamal Lewis produced a total that pushed the limits of what a single running back could generate. 30 carries, 295 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Cleveland Browns. At the time, that number set the single-setting rushing record and established a benchmark that felt nearly unreachable. From the opening drive, the tone was clear. Lewis wasn't just finding space, he was gaining significant yardage before defenders could establish contact. The Baltimore Ravens created initial movement, but what stood out was what happened after that first level. Once he broke through, his combination of size and acceleration made recovery extremely difficult. As the workload increased, the outcome didn't drop. Normally, efficiency declines as carries rise. Defenses responded, fatigue builds, and gains become smaller. That pattern didn't apply here. The more touches he received, the more the defense seemed to wear down, creating larger lanes as the contest progressed. While there were explosive runs, including an 82-yard touchdown, the yardage didn't depend on one moment. It built through repeated success across multiple drives. High workload and extreme efficiency rarely exist together at this level, which is why this stands out. Nick Foles, 7 touchdowns, perfect efficiency. On 2013, Nick Foles had an afternoon that feels closer to a controlled simulation than an actual NFL outing. 22 completions, 406 yards, 7 touchdown passes, no interceptions, and a perfect passer rating against the Oakland Raiders. Each part of that line is rare on its own. Combining all of it into a single afternoon creates something that almost never occurs. From early in the contest, there was no visible disruption to his rhythm. He wasn't constantly forced into tight window throws, but that doesn't reduce the impact. Every favorable situation turned into points. Possessions didn't stall or shift direction. They consistently ended the same way, with the ball in the end zone. That level of conversion without interruption is what set the tone. High yardage often comes with mistakes. Multiple conversion throws usually involve risk. This had neither. Decision-making remained sharp. Accuracy never dipped, and protection held long enough for plays to develop exactly as designed. Every layer functioned without breakdown, which is extremely rare over a full setting. Another factor is how quickly the box score built. By halftime, multiple touchdowns were already on the board, and the outcome had largely shifted out of reach. Even then, the execution didn't drop. There was no shift toward conservative play. The same level of precision continued, allowing the total to reach a point that few quarterbacks have ever matched. Clinton Portis, 5 rushing touchdowns. December 7th, 2003, turned into a showcase of total control on the ground. Clinton Portis piled up 218 rushing yards and reached the end zone 5 separate times against the Kansas City Chiefs, counts that should be enough to decide any setting outright. That level of end zone production alone is extreme, but the real difference is how consistently the same ending repeated every time his offense reached range. From the beginning, the Denver Broncos leaned heavily on their ground attack. The scheme emphasized timing, spacing, and disciplined blocking, and Portis operated perfectly within that setup. He didn't need to create everything independently, but once lanes opened, his acceleration carried him into the second level before defenders could reset. 5 rushing scores are unusual because maintaining that level of involvement near the goal line is extremely difficult. Typically, end zone result chances are spread across multiple options or disrupted by shifts. Here, that pattern never changed. When Denver approached the end zone, the ball went to Portis, and the game remained identical. The contest itself continued to escalate, which prevented any slowdown. Instead of shifting into clock control after gaining an advantage, the offense had to keep producing. That created additional chances, and each one followed the same pattern. There wasn't a single defining moment. It was the accumulation of identical results in the most critical areas of the field. Justin Tucker, 66-yard game-winning field goal. A finish like this pushed the limits of what a field goal attempt is supposed to look like. As the clock expired, Justin Tucker connected from 66 yards out, sealing the win over the Detroit Lions. That distance alone places it beyond what is typically considered realistic in a live situation. The sequence leading up to the kick already carried tension. The Baltimore Ravens had to move into position quickly, and even after doing so, the attempt remained extreme. Most teams would approach that scenario differently, either aiming for a shorter gain or preparing for an alternate outcome. Instead, everything rested on one attempt from well outside standard range. The execution added another layer. The ball traveled the full distance, struck the crossbar, and bounced through. That detail matters because it shows how narrow the margin was. This wasn't a clean clearance. It required just enough height and distance, combined with a favorable bounce, to succeed. From a technical standpoint, attempts beyond 60 yards are already rare, and success rates drop sharply as distance increases. Extending that to 66 yards places it in territory where even elite kickers face extremely low probability. Every element from snap to hold to contact had to align perfectly for the outcome to hold. Corey Dillon, 278 rushing yards. Corey Dillon's outing on October 22, 2000 came from a setting where almost nothing hinted at what was about to unfold. Dillon delivered an outing that quickly turned into something historic. 278 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against the Denver Broncos, setting a rookie single rushing record at the time. What stands out immediately is the context. The Cincinnati Bengals were not operating from a position of dominance, and the offense lacked consistency overall. That means Dillon's numbers didn't come from ideal conditions. It came from repeated execution within a setup that wasn't controlling other areas. He showed a level of physical control that changed how defenders approached each carry. He combined power with enough burst to turn moderate openings into extended gains. Initial contact didn't end plays. It often pushed the run further downfield, allowing yardage to build steadily. While there were explosive moments, including a long touchdown, the total wasn't built on one breakaway. It accumulated through consistent success across multiple drives. Even as realignments came, he continued finding space, showing that the display wasn't tied to a single weakness. Michael Vick, perfect passing, explosive control. During a Monday Night Football matchup against the Washington Redskins on November 15, 2010, Michael Vick produced yardage that combined efficiency, explosiveness, and control in a way that rarely aligns. 333 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a high passer rating, along with major impact as a runner. The pace shifted immediately. This wasn't a gradual buildup. Vick created momentum instantly through deep completions that stretched coverage and forced realignments. The defense had to account for multiple threats at once, and that pressure opened space across the field. Some rating display rely on short, controlled passing. Others depend on explosive plays. This included both. Accurate short throws, extended plays, and deep connections all worked together, making it difficult for the defense to settle. Another key factor was mobility. Even when he didn't carry the ball, the threat influenced every defensive decision. That hesitation created additional space, which translated into easier opportunities through the air. The finish was a showing where multiple high-difficulty elements aligned without any visible drop in execution. Calvin Johnson, 329 receiving yards in a loss. Calvin Johnson produced the kind of receiving total on October 27, 2013, that should have taken over an entire setting from start to finish. 14 catches, 329 yards, and a touchdown is a huge day for a receiver, and it stands as the highest single-game receiving yardage total in NFL history. That alone would make it unforgettable, but the closing moment is what pushes it into absurd territory. The Detroit Lions still lost to the Dallas Cowboys, which creates a contradiction that makes the production feel even stranger. A player can dominate a defense this thoroughly, pile up a record that no one has topped, and still walk away without the win. Johnson was clearly the centerpiece of everything Detroit wanted to do, and Dallas never found a lasting answer. They changed coverages, rolled help in his direction, and tried to crowd throwing windows, but none of those responses held up for long. He was not producing in only one way either. This included deep balls, jump balls, and short catches turning into run-after-catch gains. He won across the field, on different route depths, and in different coverage situations, which is exactly why the defense could not isolate one issue and fix it. Every time Dallas appeared ready to slow him down, the same problem surfaced again in a different form. 329 yards is difficult to grasp because it requires sustained success over the course of the game. A receiver does not get there off one miracle catch or one broken coverage. It takes repeated completions, continued trust from the quarterback, and enough offensive rhythm for the volume to keep building. Johnson did not inflate the total with one isolated burst and then disappear. The outcome kept coming in waves, drive after drive, which is what made the showing feel so overwhelming. He kept moving the chains, flipping field position, and giving Detroit exactly the kind of offensive edge that normally decides a contest. That is why the ending carries so much weight. With Johnson doing this much damage, the expected script says Detroit should control the outcome. Instead, Dallas stayed in range, answered with offense of its own, and then took the game in the closing moments. That final turn changes how the outcome is remembered. Rather than sitting cleanly inside a victory, it stands as one of the clearest examples that even extreme individual production does not always guarantee the result. Johnson set a record that still stands, and somehow it still was not enough. Marcus Mariota, a touchdown pass to himself. In a postseason setting in 2018, Marcus Mariota was at the center of one of the rarest point sequences the league has ever seen. During a wild card matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, he threw a touchdown pass to himself. Just saying that sounds wrong, because quarterbacks are supposed to deliver the pass, not finish the catch. Yet, by rule, the sequence counted exactly that way. Mariota received credit for both the completion and the touchdown reception, which instantly placed the play into that tiny category of moments that feel almost too strange to belong in a playoff game. The setup made it even more unusual because the Titans were not operating in a low-pressure situation, where a weird bounce could be dismissed as a random highlight. Tennessee was trailing, the offense needed points, and the throw went toward the end zone with the entire possession carrying real weight. Mariota released the ball, a defender got a hand on it, and in most cases, that is where the play dies, as either an incompletion or a turnover threat. Instead, the deflection sent the ball back toward the quarterback. Mariota stayed aware, tracked it immediately, secured the catch, and finished the play himself. That balance between chaos and awareness is a huge part of why the display stands out. Yes, the deflection introduced randomness, but the touchdown still required Mariota to react faster than everyone else around him. He had to recognize that the pass was still alive, adapt to the altered path, catch the ball cleanly, and move into the end zone before the defense recovered. Without that instant recognition, the sequence ends as a failed attempt. The strangeness of the play can distract the fact that it still demanded presence of mind in a critical moment. The broader game context is what cements it. The Titans completed the comeback, which gave the play real postseason weight instead of leaving it as a meaningless curiosity. That matters because unusual production gain more force when they directly shape the closing moment. Mariota throwing a touchdown to himself is already one of the oddest entries you will find in NFL history. Cordarrelle Patterson, multiple 100-plus yard returns. Cordarrelle Patterson belongs on any list of absurd NFL stat lines because his case is not tied to one impossible afternoon. It is built on the repeated appearance of a play that is already rare even once. Patterson recorded multiple kickoff return touchdowns of 100 yards or more, and eventually set the league record in that category. Most return men spend entire careers without ever taking one the full distance from that deep. Patterson kept doing it across different seasons, different coaching staffs, and different teams, which turned something that usually looks like a fluke into a repeating pattern. A return of that length requires almost every variable to cooperate. The kick has to land deep enough to force a true run back. The blocking unit has to create early space without drawing a penalty that erases the whole play. The returner then has to read pursuit angles instantly, choose the correct lane, get to full speed in almost no time, and still maintain balance through traffic before reaching the final wave of defenders. Usually, one small mistake ends the run around the 30, the 40, or midfield. Patterson kept clearing the entire field, which tells you this was more than random chaos. A lot of elite return specialists are smaller players built around quick cuts and sudden direction changes. Patterson had a bigger frame, which made him dangerous in a different way. He could absorb poor tackling attempts, keep momentum after contact, and still reach open field speed fast enough to erase pursuit angles. That combination changed how opponents had to approach him. He was elusive in space, was physically difficult to stop once the return gained shape, which made every mistake in coverage more costly. There is also a larger historical point that makes the record stronger. Patterson built this return resume during an era when kickoff opportunities were gradually shrinking. More touchbacks reduced chances. Coverage units became more specialized. Teams often preferred caution, choosing to avoid giving a dangerous returner any opening at all. Despite that environment, he still kept producing. That is why the total feels so outrageous. It is not one highlight. It is repeated dominance in a phase of football where repeated dominance is extremely hard to sustain. Jerome Harrison, 286 rushing yards out of nowhere. Jerome Harrison delivered one of the strangest rushing explosions the NFL has ever seen. Against the Kansas City Chiefs, he ran for 286 yards and 3 touchdowns, a total that places the showing among the greatest single contest rushing yardage in league history. The number itself is massive, but the real reason it feels so unusual is who produced it. Harrison was not entering that afternoon with the kind of league-wide reputation that normally makes people think a record-level display is coming. The performance also did not rely on a single early breakaway that immediately told everyone history might be forming. It grew over time through repeated chunks of yardage that kept increasing pressure on the defense. As the contest moved forward, Kansas City kept losing control of gap discipline and tackling angles, while Cleveland kept finding more confidence in the ground attack. Harrison's running style played a huge part in that. He was decisive, he identified creases quickly, and once he committed, he accelerated through them without hesitation. That kind of timing matters, because huge rushing totals are not only about raw speed. They depend on vision, discipline, and the ability to maximize space before it closes. Another major reason this production stands out is the workload. Harrison carried the ball 34 times, which means this was not some low-volume outlier inflated by 2 miracle runs and a handful of extra touches. He handled a heavy load and still maintained extraordinary efficiency. That is one of the hardest combinations to sustain in football. As carries rise, averages usually fall. Defenders counter, contact wears on the body, and the clean lanes start to shrink. None of that changed the outcome enough here. The historical placement gives the performance even more weight. Harrison finished just short of the all-time rushing record, which means his name sits alongside some of the biggest single matchup rushing totals ever recorded. That alone feels surprising, because fans usually expect those spots to belong to the biggest legendary names. Harrison's matchup breaks that expectation completely. It is one of the clearest examples that under the right conditions, a player outside the usual historic spotlight can suddenly produce something that looks almost impossible. Tony Romo, 506 passing yards and 5 touchdowns, still a loss. Tony Romo produced the kind of quarterback stats that should almost automatically lock down a victory. On October 6, 2013, he threw for 506 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception against the Denver Broncos. In most situations, that is enough to win and enough to define the entire week around the league. Yet Dallas still lost, which is what gives the numbers its absurd shape. A 500-yard, 5-touchdown outing is supposed to be decisive. Instead, it became the offensive centerpiece of a loss in one of the wildest shootouts the league has seen. The game moved at a pace that barely allowed for error. Both offenses kept delivering in the end zone, defensive resistance kept fading, and the normal balance of football disappeared. In that kind of environment, the quarterback has to keep answering because every possession matters more than usual. Romo did exactly that. His production was not empty accumulation gathered after the outcome had already tilted away. He was matching the pace of the matchup in real time, which is a major reason the performance holds so much weight. Dallas stayed alive because he kept delivering. The yardage itself came in a variety of ways, which makes the total even more impressive. This wasn't a stream of short throws quietly building output. Romo hit deeper routes, worked intermediate windows, and kept the offense moving at speed across different parts of the field. The 5 touchdown passes mattered just as much as the 506 yards because they show that the impact translated directly into points. This was high-volume impact, which is why it should have been enough to take control of the afternoon. What changed everything was the environment around the production and the timing of the one mistake that remained. Because Denver kept producing at the same pace, there was no margin for error left by the end. One late interception shifted the final sequence and reframed the entire showing. Instead of being remembered only as one of the greatest quarterback contests ever, it became an example of how even extreme yardage can fail to secure the win when everything turns into a full-scale offensive race. Nick Chubb, 3 touchdowns on 3 carries. On October 2018, Nick Chubb registered 3 carries, turned into 105 yards, and 3 touchdowns against the Oakland Raiders. That means every single touch ended in the end zone. Not a first down, not a moderate gain, but the maximum possible outcome each time he handled the ball. In a sport built on variability, that level of consistency feels almost impossible. Chubb wasn't handling a full workload or building rhythm through repeated touches. He only had 3 rushing attempts. In most cases, that kind of usage barely registers statistically. Here, it created one of the most extreme efficiency profiles ever recorded. The imbalance between opportunity and returns is what immediately sets this apart from traditional standout performances. Each run reached the same ending, but the way they developed still required execution. Long touchdowns depend on initial blocking, quick recognition of running lanes, and the ability to capitalize once space opens. Chubb showed strong vision, identifying openings almost instantly, and once he reached open field, his acceleration created separation that defenders couldn't recover from. The combination of awareness and speed turned every carry into points on the board. The most striking part is the lack of interruption. Even elite runners experience negative plays, short gains, or stalled attempts. Defensive positioning, missed blocks, or simple randomness usually disrupt perfect results. None of that applied here. Every carry reached the end zone, removing the unpredictability that normally defines rushing attempts. Devin Hester, opening kickoff touchdown in the Super Bowl. Devin Hester produced a moment that immediately broke the expected rhythm of a championship setting back on February 4th, 2007. Facing the Indianapolis Colts in Super Bowl 41, the Chicago Bears received the opening kickoff. Before either offense ran a play, Hester returned it 92 yards for a touchdown. That alone is rare. Doing it on the very first play of the Super Bowl makes it even more difficult to process. Kickoff returns for touchdowns are already uncommon because coverage units are designed specifically to prevent them. In a Super Bowl setting, preparation reaches its highest level. Teams emphasize lane discipline, tackling fundamentals, and positional awareness because one mistake can define the outcome. Despite all of that, the first sequence turned into a score. The structure of the return highlights how precise everything had to be. The kick landed in a returnable area, introducing risk. The blocking unit created just enough space without losing shape. Hester read the initial lanes, moved through the first wave, and once he reached open field, the play shifted into a race defined by speed and angles. At that point, separation became inevitable. Instead of a gradual opening where teams settle in, Chicago took an instant lead. That forced Indianapolis to counter immediately. Even though the Colts eventually won, the return remains the only opening kickoff touchdown in Super Bowl history, which reinforces how rare it is for something like this to happen under maximum pressure. Doug Martin, 251 yards and 4 touchdowns. Doug Martin's rushing performance on November 4th, 2012 sits among the highest single totals ever recorded. Against the Oakland Raiders, he finished with 25 carries, 251 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That total alone places the contest near the top historically. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers established the run as a central focus, and Martin responded immediately. He showed strong vision, identifying lanes quickly, and once he reached the second level, his acceleration allowed him to extend plays beyond their initial design. That combination created consistent gains that kept building across multiple drives. The balance between explosive moments and sustained count sets this display apart. There were long offensive runs, including an 87-yard touchdown, but the total wasn't dependent on a single breakaway. Outcomes continued across multiple series, which prevented the defense from stabilizing or resetting. Another key factor is how the defense responded. As the yardage increased, changes came in the form of stacked fronts and added support near the line. Even with those changes, Martin kept finding space. That shows the advantage wasn't tied to one breakdown. It existed across different looks, which is why the results stayed high from start to finish. Patrick Mahomes, 5,097 yards and 50 touchdowns in first season as starter. In 2018, Patrick Mahomes produced a season that usually takes years to approach. In his first full year as the starter for the Kansas City Chiefs, he threw for 5,097 yards and 50 touchdowns. That combination is rare on its own. Doing it immediately, without a long buildup, makes it stand out. The offense operated at a pace that forced defenses into constant reaction. Mahomes didn't rely on one type of throw. Yardage came from deep passes, intermediate routes, and plays extended beyond their original design. That variety made it difficult for defenses to settle into a consistent plan. Passing for over 5,000 yards is already uncommon. Pairing that with 50 touchdowns means the production consistently turned into points rather than just field position. Drives didn't stall near the goal line, they finished. Another important layer is how the output held even as defenses altered their approach. As the season progressed, opponents increased pressure and altered coverage. Despite that, Mahomes continued producing through timing, improvisation, and off-script creation. That ability to sustain impact after recalibrations makes this more than a strong showing, but a historic impact. Ryan Fitzpatrick, 6 touchdowns and still lost. Ryan Fitzpatrick's performance on September 16, 2018 should have controlled everything. 402 yards and 6 touchdown passes against the Pittsburgh Steelers. In most situations, that guarantees a win. Instead, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers still lost. The pace pushed both offenses into constant goal line finishes situations. Fitzpatrick delivered early, connecting on multiple touchdown passes, and building a total that quickly moved beyond typical production. The offense didn't struggle to move the ball. It consistently created points. It becomes difficult to process because the scoring yardage is that clean. 6 touchdown passes indicate repeated success in high-leverage situations. That usually reflects control. Each point drive reinforces that control. Here, that pattern didn't hold because the opposing offense kept matching it. The difference came down to the environment and timing. Pittsburgh continued producing at the same rate, which removed any margin for error. Key moments shifted the game, and despite the overall output, the final moments moved in the opposite direction. Deion Sanders, pick 6 and punt return touchdown in the same game. Deion Sanders produced stats that crosses those boundaries in a way that feels structurally impossible. In a single matchup, he recorded an interception returned for a touchdown and also took a punt back for a score, impacting defense and special teams at the highest level. Playing cornerback demands discipline, positioning, and the ability to read quarterbacks and route concepts. Returning punts requires vision in open space, instant decision-making, and acceleration through traffic. Excelling in one area is already difficult. Producing touchdowns in both roles within the same contest is extremely rare. On the defensive side, the interception required anticipation and timing. Sanders recognized the quarterback's intent, positioned himself correctly, and secured the ball in a way that allowed an immediate transition into open field movement. Once he had possession, his speed created separation quickly, turning what could have been a standard takeaway into a points-on-the-board situation. The punt return adds a completely different layer. Unlike interceptions, the return begins with coverage units already moving at speed. The returner must secure the catch, make an immediate decision, and navigate through multiple angles of pursuit. One mistake usually ends the play early. Sanders didn't just handle the pressure, he turned it into another touchdown, creating a display where 2 separate forms of dominance aligned. Alvin Kamara, 6 rushing touchdowns in one game. Alvin Kamara finished with 22 carries, 155 yards, and 6 rushing touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings back on December 25, 2020. That total ties the NFL record. The New Orleans Saints established a clear pattern. When they reached the red zone, the ball went to Kamara. The defense knew exactly what was coming and still couldn't stop it. Normally, repeated usage in those situations leads to changes, tighter fronts, and force changes in approach. That shifts never changed the outcome. Kamara's running style played a major role in that consistency. He combined balance, patience, and acceleration in a way that allowed him to navigate tight spaces effectively. Near the goal line, where space is limited, those traits become more important than straight-line speed. He found small openings, maintained control through contact, and finished runs in situations where plays typically stall. Football is built on adaptability. When one approach works repeatedly, the opposing side usually finds a way to limit it. Here, each scoring sequence reinforced the same pattern without interruption. That is what separates this result. It wasn't just high points differential, it was predictable success that still couldn't be stopped. Ben Roethlisberger, back-to-back 6-touchdown games. In late October and early November of 2014, Ben Roethlisberger produced a stretch that challenges how consistency is understood. He threw 6 touchdown passes in one setting, then followed it the next week with another 6-touchdown showing, creating a 2-game span with 12 total throws. The first one came against the Indianapolis Colts, where the Pittsburgh Steelers offense operated with control and pace. Roethlisberger distributed the ball across multiple targets, preventing the defense from focusing on one receiver. The production built steadily, with end zone plays coming through different route concepts and field areas. What stands out in that first outing is how balanced it was. Some high touchdown afternoons rely on a single mismatch or repeated target. Here, the scoring was spread out, which made defensive cooters less effective. There was no single point to contain, and the offense converted opportunities without disruption. The second one was against the Baltimore Ravens, is where the production becomes even more unusual. Defenses typically adapt quickly after a showing like that. Despite preparation and awareness, the same ending appeared again. Replicating that level immediately after reaching it once is extremely difficult, which is why this 2 stretch stands out historically. Matt Ryan, 466 yards in a Super Bowl collapse. Matt Ryan's performance on February 5, 2017, appeared to confirm complete control of the biggest stage. He finished with 466 passing yards as the Atlanta Falcons built a massive lead against the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 51. Atlanta's offense operated with precision. Ryan delivered accurate throws across all areas of the field, converting key situations and maintaining momentum. The yardage accumulated steadily and directly contributed to a lead that appeared secure. At one point, the Falcons held a 28-3 advantage, which under normal conditions would place the contest out of reach. That context is critical. High yardage in a close contest is common. High yardage while building a large lead reinforces the expectation that the outcome is already decided. This impact becomes difficult to process because the structure of the contest changed. The Patriots recalibrated, possession stalled, and key moments shifted control away. Despite the early dominance reflected in the numbers, the outcome moved in the opposite direction, turning a high-level display into part of one of the most dramatic reversals in NFL history. Gale Sayers, 6 touchdowns as a rookie. Gale Sayers' rookie season back in 1965 immediately placed him into a category usually reserved for established stars. He scored 6 touchdowns in a single matchup against the San Francisco 49ers, tying the NFL record. The touchdowns came in multiple forms. Sayers scored as a runner, as a receiver, and on a return. That range matters because it shows the showing wasn't built on one repeated call or a single mismatch. Each role requires a different skill set, and he executed all of them within the same contest. The Chicago Bears found ways to put the ball in his hands, and each opportunity carried the same potential final sequence. The defense couldn't isolate one area to fix because the production came from different phases. When they focused on one, he impacted another. The rookie context amplifies everything. Players entering the league usually require time to familiarize themselves to speed and complexity. Sayers bypassed that entirely. Producing at that level across multiple roles in a single afternoon is rare on its own. Shaun Alexander, 5 touchdowns in a single half. Shaun Alexander produced a scoring stretch that feels compressed beyond what football usually allows in 2002. He ran for 5 touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings, and every one of them came in a single half. 5 rushing scores across an entire matchup already puts a player in rare territory. Packing that many into 2 quarters is what gives this its strange shape. It turns a full game achievement into something that happened inside a much smaller window, which is why it stands out so sharply when you revisit it. In most high-scoring afternoons, touchdowns are spread across 4 quarters, multiple drives, and often several different contributors. Here, the same closing moment kept returning in a concentrated burst. Every time the Seattle Seahawks reached the part of the field where finishing mattered most, Alexander kept ending the possession the same way. That kind of concentrated success is difficult because football usually interrupts those runs. A stalled drive, a penalty, a defensive stop, or one failed short yardage snap is normally enough to break the pattern. None of that happened often enough to slow this down. The offensive structure helped, but it does not fully explain the total. Alexander operated in a system built around coordinated blocking, timing, and a run that could create creases before the defense settled. Even with that kind of support, reaching 5 touchdowns in one half still requires repeated success in the highest leverage situations. Near the goal line, the field tightens. Defenders react faster, and clean space disappears quickly. Alexander still kept finding openings, staying balanced through contact, and finishing plays before the defense could fully close the gap. That is what gives the showing its absurd feel. The Vikings saw the pattern, understood where the damage was coming from, and still could not stop the repetition. 5 touchdowns over 4 quarters would already be memorable. 5 in one half feels like the pacing of the sport temporarily broke. Instead of the usual rise and fall of momentum, the same conversations kept appearing, without enough interruption to restore balance. Drew Brees, multiple 5,000-yard seasons. Passing for 5,000 yards in one season is supposed to represent a near-perfect alignment of conditions. A quarterback needs health, volume, efficiency, receiver reliability, and enough week-to-week consistency to keep the total climbing without major drop-off. Not only did Brees reach that mark once, he crossed it multiple times, which is exactly why the production shifts from impressive to absurd. One 5,000-yard season can be explained as a perfect storm. Repeating it suggests something much more durable and much more unusual. Within the New Orleans Saints offense, Brees operated in a system built on timing, spacing, anticipation, and precise ball placement. That setup allowed the passing attack to stay in rhythm, but even a strong system is not enough on its own to create 5,000 yards over and over. A quarterback still has to maintain command across an entire season, deal with changing defensive looks, and keep producing whether the matchup calls for patience, tempo, or aggressive downfield movement. Brees kept doing that across different years, which is a major reason the total matters so much. Durability is another huge part of the story. Seasonal yardage at that level is more than just talent. It depends on availability and sustained sharpness. Even a minor interruption can cut enough attempts and production to keep a player short of the number. Brees remained on the field, kept the offense moving, and continued stacking yardage without the extended slump that usually pulls extreme totals back to earth. That is why the repeatability matters. He was not simply touching a high point once, he kept returning to it. There is also a broader historical layer that gives this production more weight. Plenty of great quarterbacks have had elite passing seasons, but very few have repeatedly crossed the 5,000-yard threshold. Even in an era more open to passing volume, that number still resists repetition. Brees turned what is normally a rare seasonal summit into something he could revisit. Dak Prescott, 450-plus yards and still losing. A quarterback going past 450 passing yards usually signals that he controlled huge portions of the contest. That amount of impact reflects sustained movement downfield, multiple successful drives, and enough offensive traction to shape the ending. Dak Prescott has produced multiple weekends above that range, yet some of those outings still ended in losses. With the Dallas Cowboys, Prescott piled up those yardage numbers through a mix of volume, efficiency, and repeated downfield success. These were not isolated splash plays doing all the work. The ball moved steadily, drives kept building, and the offense generated meaningful chunks across different parts of the field. That matters because it means the yardage was not accidental or empty. It reflected real command over large stretches, which is exactly why the losses attached to those totals feel so counterintuitive. Part of the explanation comes from the environment. In several of those outings, the opposing side either matched or exceeded the pace of touchdown pace, which removed the buffer that high yardage usually creates. Instead of using yardage to sit on control, Prescott had to keep throwing to answer points coming back the other way. In some cases, a portion of the total also came while trying to erase a deficit late. That does not make the yardage less impressive, but it changes how it functioned. Rather than building separation, it became part of a chase. One 450-yard loss can be written off as a shootout or an outlier. When it happens more than once, it starts to look like a pattern where extreme passing production and the final outcome refuse to line up the way they normally should. Football usually rewards that level of quarterback production with control over the result. In these cases, the numbers rose high enough to suggest dominance, yet the wins still did not follow. Brandon Weeden, negative passing yards. Brandon Weeden production on October 5, 2014 directly reverses the basic purpose of passing. Playing for the Dallas Cowboys against the Houston Texans, he finished with negative net passing yards, ending at -7 through the air. That number feels almost impossible in the modern NFL because passing is designed to create positive movement, even on inefficient days. A quarterback can struggle badly and still usually finish above 0. Dropping below it means nearly everything went the wrong way at once. The key detail is the difference between gross passing yards and net passing yards. Net passing includes sacks, which subtract from the total, so a quarterback can complete throws and still finish with very little if the offense keeps losing ground elsewhere. In this case, that exact combination showed up. Weeden did complete passes, but they generated too little yardage to offset what was being lost when the pocket collapsed. Short gains failed to move the offense enough, and each sack dragged the total further backward. Dallas leaned heavily on the run, which meant the passing volume stayed relatively low. When attempts are limited, every negative play carries more weight in the final total. A few sacks and a handful of low-value completions can suddenly distort the entire ending. Against Houston, defensive pressure kept interrupting plays before they could develop, and that constant disruption prevented the passing from doing even the minimum needed to stay above 0. That is why the production feels so strange. It is not merely a low-output passing day. It is a day where the passing functionally moved the offense backward. In an era built around spacing, protection realignments, and quick throws designed to avoid exactly this kind of finish, finishing with negative net yardage feels like an inversion of how modern offense is supposed to work. The number is small, but the weirdness of it is enormous. Lamar Jackson, 5 touchdowns on 15 passes. Passing efficiency is usually built through rhythm, high completion totals, controlled decisions, and a steady climb in returns. Lamar Jackson compressed all of that into remarkably small volume on September 8, 2019, against the Miami Dolphins. He finished with 15 completions, 324 yards, and 5 touchdown passes. 5 scores on that number of completions is what gives the outcome its unusual shape. The Baltimore Ravens established immediate control, and Jackson's successful throws carried huge value almost every time they landed. Rather than building through long, methodical possessions, the offense generated major chunks quickly. Early deep passes stretched the defense, created instant damage, and changed the geometry. That allowed the Ravens to reach maximum output before the passing volume had any need to expand, which is the opposite of how most big touchdown afternoons are built. Another important layer is the range within the production. Jackson did not rely on one repeated concept to pile up those touchdowns. The performance came through different depths and different passing situations, including downfield strikes, intermediate work, and plays that developed after extra time in the pocket. That variety mattered because it prevented Miami from locking on to one answer. The offense was not just efficient, it was diverse enough to keep the defense reacting without finding a stable response. The script makes the final count even stranger. Once Baltimore built a commanding lead, there was no reason to force additional passing attempts just to inflate totals. That kept Jackson's volume low, yet the production was already finished at an extreme level. Most quarterbacks need many more completions and many more throws to reach 5 touchdown passes. Jackson got there before the contest required sustained aerial volume, which is exactly why the outing feels compressed and out of proportion to the workload. Reggie White, 21 sacks in a season. A single sack already requires timing, positioning, and execution against protection schemes designed to prevent it. Reaching double digits across a season places a player in elite territory. Reggie White recorded 21 sacks during the 1987 season with the Philadelphia Eagles, a total that stands among the highest ever and reflects sustained dominance rather than a few isolated spikes. Week after week, opposing quarterbacks faced pressure that translated into outcome, even as offenses modified protection to account for his presence. Most pass rush production relies on variation, disguising pressure, or exploiting specific matchups. White's production came from something more direct. His combination of strength, leverage, and technique allowed him to win individual battles repeatedly, even when the offense knew exactly where the threat was coming from. Another layer comes from how sacks typically accumulate. Unlike yardage totals, they rarely build evenly. A player might dominate one afternoon and then go quiet for stretches. White's total reflects steady output across the schedule. It didn't depend on one or two extreme outings inflating the number. It developed gradually, which is significantly harder to maintain. The era also matters. Offensive systems at the time leaned more toward the run, which reduced passing volume and limited sack opportunities compared to modern football. Reaching 21 under those conditions highlights how efficient he was at converting chances into impact plays. Chicago Bears, 73 points in a championship game. The Chicago Bears defeated the Washington Redskins by a score of 73-0 in the NFL championship game, perfection that didn't align with how championship matchups are supposed to unfold. The margin alone is extreme. The total itself is what pushes it into territory that still feels difficult to process. Championship settings usually bring balance. Teams reach that stage because they can compete at a high level, which typically results in tighter outcomes. This moved in the opposite direction almost immediately. Chicago established control through execution that the defense could not match. The offensive approach played a major role. Chicago used misdirection and timing to create confusion, and once that confusion took hold, it became difficult for Washington to recover. Each successful play reinforced the same pattern, allowing the end zone finishes to continue without interruption. Instead of building gradually, the total expanded rapidly. Reaching 73 points requires repeated end zone success across multiple possessions without enough resistance to slow the pace. Even in one-sided contests, shifts usually reduce that production. Here, they didn't. That's why this remains the highest goal line finishes total in a championship setting and still feels disconnected from expectation. Mitchell Trubisky, 6 touchdowns before the fourth quarter. Mitchell Trubisky put together an outing back in 2018 that escalated rapidly and left little room for anything else to match it. He finished with 6 touchdown passes against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and all of them came before the fourth quarter. The total itself is rare. The Chicago Bears offense operated with rhythm. Early completions established timing, and once that rhythm took hold, the defense struggled to interrupt it. Each drive followed a similar pattern, with spacing opening across the field and red zone opportunities appearing consistently. What makes this difficult to process is how end zone success usually distributes over time. Even high-output afternoons include stalled drives or adjustments that slow production. Here, that interruption never appeared. The offense kept producing at the same rate, which allowed the total to build quickly within a limited window. The variety of plays also matters. The touchdowns didn't come from one repeated concept. They involved different receivers and different areas of the field, which prevented the defense from locking on to a single adjustment. By the time the contest reached its final phase, the stats had already reached its peak, emphasizing how compressed that afternoon was. J.J. Watt, offensive and defensive touchdowns in the same season. In 2014, J.J. Watt had a performance that challenges how roles are defined. Playing for the Houston Texans, he dominated defensively while also contributing touchdowns on offense. Defensive players rarely take on offensive red zone responsibilities in a consistent way. On defense, Watt generated pressure, recorded sacks, and disrupted offensive structure on a regular basis. That alone places a player among the most impactful in the league. What made this season different is how his role expanded. He was used in specific offensive situations, particularly near the goal line, where his size and positioning created an advantage. When given those opportunities, he converted them into touchdowns. That adds a completely different dimension to the totals. Defensive line play requires constant physical engagement, leverage battles, and positional discipline. Offensive red zone roles demand timing, ball tracking, and execution in space. Watt handled both within the same season. The broader impact shows up in preparation. Opponents had to account for him not only as a defensive presence, but also as a potential offensive target. That dual responsibility is extremely rare and changes how teams approach planning. Combining dominance on one side with scoring contributions on the other creates a profile that doesn't fit typical positional boundaries, which is why the production feels so unusual. 1974 NFL Draft. At the start of 1974, Pittsburgh already possessed a rugged defense, a physical rushing attack, and a coaching staff committed to discipline and precision. What the roster still lacked were several critical championship pieces. The offense needed reliable downfield targets, capable of producing explosive plays when defenses stacked the line. The defense needed a commanding presence in the middle who could organize the unit and punish mistakes. The offensive line also lacked a long-term stabilizer, responsible for communication and protection adjustments. The selections that year addressed every one of those needs. Lynn Swann introduced explosive receiving ability and immediate special teams impact. Jack Lambert quickly developed into the emotional and tactical leader of the defense, directing alignments while delivering punishing tackles. Later rounds delivered extraordinary value with John Stallworth, who grew into a complete deep threat, and center Mike Webster, whose toughness and intelligence anchored the offensive line for years. An additional layer of greatness appeared after the draft concluded. Safety Donnie Shell entered the roster as an undrafted addition and eventually developed into another Hall of Fame level player. His physical presence and instincts strengthened the secondary and completed a crop that covered every level of the roster. Instead of concentrating talent in one area, the group delivered elite contributors at receiver, linebacker, center, and safety. The results arrived immediately and continued throughout the decade. Pittsburgh captured its first championship during the 1974 season, while rookies from this group already contributed meaningful snaps. Over the following years, the same players formed the backbone of a dominant run that produced 4 titles. That combination of immediate impact, positional balance, and long-term excellence is why the 1974 Pittsburgh draft remains the benchmark for evaluating scouting success. 1989 NFL Draft. 3 players who defined the NFL in the 1990s were drafted in the 1989 NFL Draft. Troy Aikman, Barry Sanders, and Deion Sanders dominated entirely different areas of the game while transforming the fortunes of their franchises. Aikman provided leadership and precision at quarterback in Dallas. Barry Sanders introduced a breathtaking style of running in Detroit, and Deion Sanders elevated the cornerback role into a weekly strategic weapon. Dallas selected Aikman first overall while beginning a complete organizational rebuild. His calm decision-making, accuracy within structured offenses, and leadership under pressure eventually guided the Cowboys through a dominant championship run during the 1990s. Detroit's choice of Barry Sanders created one of the most electrifying rushing careers ever seen. His combination of acceleration, balance, and sudden direction changes allowed him to escape defenders in situations that looked impossible, producing 10 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons and more than 15,000 career rushing yards. The fifth selection introduced a completely different kind of influence. Deion Sanders brought track-level speed, elite ball skills, and unmatched confidence to the defensive secondary. Receivers struggled to separate from him in man coverage, forcing quarterbacks to avoid throwing toward his side of the field. Beyond coverage duties, he also delivered explosive returns and occasional offensive contributions, turning him into one of the most recognizable athletes of the era. The enduring significance of the 1989 rookie group comes from how these three stars shaped an entire decade of football. One anchored a championship dynasty. Another rewrote expectations for running backs through agility and creativity. And the third transformed defensive strategy by proving a single cornerback could erase half the field. Few rookies have ever delivered that level of influence across so many different areas of the game. 2011 NFL Draft. By the early 2010s, professional football was moving towards speed, spacing, and explosive offense. Passing attacks were expanding because of rule adjustments that protected quarterbacks and receivers, while defenses searched for faster edge rushers and versatile linemen capable of disrupting spread concepts. The 2011 draft delivered a group of players perfectly suited for this environment, producing elite performers who would dominate both sides of the ball for more than a decade. Carolina selected Cam Newton first overall after his dominant college run, and his arrival immediately expanded the possibilities of the quarterback position. Newton combined rare physical strength with open-field running ability and a powerful vertical arm. His rookie campaign shattered expectations, with more than 4,000 passing yards and over 700 rushing yards, forcing defensive coordinators to treat the quarterback as a legitimate rushing threat on every snap. His peak came in 2015, when he captured the league's Most Valuable Player award while leading Carolina to a championship appearance. Defensively, two players from this draft reshaped pass rushing dominance during the decade. J.J. Watt developed into one of the most disruptive defensive linemen of his generation through relentless pressure, tackles for loss, and the rare ability to affect passing lanes by batting down throws at the line of scrimmage. Von Miller provided a different form of chaos from the edge, combining explosive acceleration and elite bending ability to terrorize offensive tackles. His defining moment arrived during the championship game following the 2015 season, when repeated strip sacks and constant pressure earned him the game's Most Valuable Player honor. The draft group also delivered a prototype modern wide receiver in Julio Jones. Atlanta aggressively moved up the board to secure him, recognizing the rare blend of size, speed, and route precision he possessed. Jones quickly evolved into one of the most feared receiving threats of the decade, repeatedly finishing near the top of the league in receiving yardage, while transforming Atlanta's passing attack into one of the most explosive units in football. When combined with the defensive dominance and quarterback innovation from the same draft pool, the 2011 group helped shape the competitive landscape of the entire decade. 1996 NFL Draft. The 1996 draft produced a collection of players who would dominate the sport from the late 1990s into the early 2000s. Several members eventually entered the Hall of Fame, while becoming the defining faces of their respective franchises. The group included Ray Lewis, Terrell Owens, Marvin Harrison, and Brian Dawkins, four players whose influence extended far beyond individual statistics. Ray Lewis quickly emerged as the heartbeat of Baltimore's defense. His sideline-to-sideline range, violent tackling style, and unmatched football intelligence allowed him to control the middle of the field. Lewis did more than rack up tackles. He directed defensive alignments before the snap and energized teammates with relentless intensity. His leadership played a central role in the historic Baltimore defense that powered the franchise to a championship during the 2000 season. Offensively, the draft group delivered 2 wide receivers who produced extraordinary careers in completely different ways. Terrell Owens relied on physical dominance and explosive yards after the catch, turning routine receptions into long gains, while accumulating more than 15,000 receiving yards and over 150 touchdowns. Marvin Harrison built his reputation through surgical route running and precision timing. His partnership with quarterback Peyton Manning produced one of the most productive passing combinations in league history, highlighted by record-breaking reception totals and consistent scoring production. Brian Dawkins added another legendary defensive presence from the secondary. Known for ferocious intensity and emotional leadership, Dawkins anchored the defense in Philadelphia for more than a decade. His ability to cover deep routes, support against the run, and blitz from the secondary made him one of the most versatile safeties of his era. Together, these players turned the 1996 rookie crop into a rare group that produced elite performers across offense and defense while shaping the league for years. 1983 NFL Draft. The 1983 draft helped the NFL transition toward pass-driven offenses. Notable names from this pool of rookies include John Elway, Dan Marino, and Jim Kelly. 3 players who each became the centerpiece of his franchise while influencing how the quarterback position would be evaluated in the future. John Elway entered the league with enormous expectations because of his rare physical ability. His powerful arm, mobility outside the pocket, and ability to deliver under pressure quickly established him as one of the most dangerous quarterbacks of his era. Elway built a reputation for dramatic late-game drives and postseason leadership, eventually guiding his franchise to multiple championships while becoming one of the most recognizable figures at the position. Dan Marino introduced a different kind of revolution through pure passing ability. His lightning-fast release and advanced defensive recognition allowed him to execute aggressive vertical attacks with remarkable efficiency. Early in his career, he shattered several passing records and demonstrated how explosive a pass-focused offense could become. His success encouraged teams throughout the league to embrace more aggressive aerial strategies. Jim Kelly provided the third pillar by directing one of the most innovative offenses of the era. Operating within a fast-paced, no-huddle system, Kelly used quick decision-making and strong field vision to maintain relentless offensive tempo. The approach forced defenses to remain on the field without substitutions and created constant mismatches. The presence of 3 elite quarterbacks emerging from the same draft turned the 1983 draft group into the most celebrated quarterback group in professional football history. 1970 NFL Draft. The 1970 draft is remembered for producing one of the most dominant teams of the decade. Terry Bradshaw entered professional football during a period of major transition following the merger that unified previously competing leagues. In that environment, organizations were searching for long-term leaders capable of directing offenses through an evolving competitive landscape. Bradshaw arrived with a reputation for possessing exceptional arm strength, a trait that allowed him to attack defenses with aggressive downfield passing. His throws carried both distance and velocity, enabling receivers to stretch coverage vertically. That ability gave his offense a dangerous dimension that forced defenses to defend large portions of the field. Like many young quarterbacks adjusting to professional competition, Bradshaw faced early struggles while learning to read complex coverages and manage game tempo. Over time, those experiences sharpened his decision-making and improved his chemistry with receivers. As his confidence grew, he became increasingly capable of delivering decisive plays during critical moments. Bradshaw ultimately guided his team through multiple championship seasons, demonstrating poise during postseason competition and providing the offensive leadership required to complement a powerful defense. His selection in the 1970 draft proved foundational for a franchise that would dominate the decade, cementing his place among the defining quarterbacks of that era. 2017 NFL Draft. By the late 2000s, professional football had entered a period where explosive passing and relentless pressure defined success. Offenses leaned heavily on quarterbacks capable of extending plays while launching aggressive downfield attacks, while defenses searched for pass rushers capable of disrupting those systems before routes fully developed. The 2017 player pool delivered elite talent at both of those critical positions, producing Patrick Mahomes, Myles Garrett, and T.J. Watt, three players who quickly rose to the top of the sport and helped define competition in the years that followed. Patrick Mahomes entered the league with rare physical tools that intrigued evaluators, but also raised questions about whether his improvisational college style would translate to the professional level. After spending his first season developing behind a veteran starter, he took control of the offense the following year and delivered one of the most explosive campaigns ever recorded by a young quarterback. His ability to launch deep passes with extraordinary arm strength, throw accurately from unconventional angles, and create opportunities after the pocket collapsed introduced a level of creativity that defenses struggled to contain. While Mahomes reshaped offensive possibilities, two defensive stars from the same group emerged as dominant pass rushers capable of disrupting even the most sophisticated attacks. Myles Garrett arrived with an exceptional blend of size, acceleration, and flexibility that allowed him to explode past blockers and collapse the pocket within seconds. His constant pressure forced offenses to commit extra protection resources, altering blocking schemes across entire game plans. T.J. Watt developed into another relentless disruptor through precise technique, rapid reactions at the snap, and an unmatched motor that produced sacks, forced fumbles, and tackles behind the line of scrimmage. The significance of the 2017 group comes from how its leading figures shaped the competitive balance of the sport. Mahomes became the centerpiece of one of the most creative and productive offenses of the modern era, while Garrett and Watt established themselves among the most feared defenders in football. Their sustained excellence at the most influential positions ensured that the draft left a lasting mark on the league's strategic direction and competitive landscape. 2001 NFL Draft. At the beginning of the 2000s, offensive strategy was evolving rapidly. Coaches experimented with formations that spread defenses across the field while searching for playmakers capable of thriving in multiple roles. The 2001 draft produced several individuals perfectly suited for this transition, most notably LaDainian Tomlinson, Drew Brees, and Steve Smith Sr., three competitors whose skill sets helped shape offensive football for nearly 2 decades. LaDainian Tomlinson quickly emerged as the centerpiece of his offense because he offered far more than traditional rushing ability. His acceleration through running lanes, combined with elite receiving skill out of the backfield, created constant matchup problems for opposing defenses. Tomlinson could break long runs, catch passes in open space, and dominate near the goal line with remarkable scoring efficiency. During his peak seasons, he produced extraordinary touchdown totals while carrying one of the most productive offenses of the era. Drew Brees entered the league facing skepticism about his physical size, yet his understanding of defensive coverages and pinpoint accuracy quickly silenced those concerns. Brees built his career around rapid decision-making and precise timing, allowing him to orchestrate high-volume passing attacks that overwhelmed opposing defenses. Over time, he repeatedly led the league in passing categories, demonstrating how anticipation and accuracy could drive record-breaking offensive production. Steve Smith Sr. added another dynamic dimension to the draft group through explosive playmaking and unmatched competitiveness. Despite lacking the towering height typical of many receivers, Smith relied on speed, aggressive route running, and relentless determination to dominate defensive backs. His ability to turn short receptions into long gains and his fiery leadership within the offense made him one of the most feared and respected receivers of his era. 2014 NFL Draft. During the mid-2000s, the sport had fully transformed into a passing-dominated environment, forcing defenses to search for players capable of disrupting quarterbacks before routes could develop. This group of rookies delivered exactly that kind of defensive firepower, while also introducing one of the most technically refined receivers of the modern era. Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, and Davante Adams emerged as the central figures of a group remembered for both dominant defense and elite offensive precision. Aaron Donald transformed expectations for interior defensive linemen almost immediately. Though some evaluators questioned his size compared to traditional tackles, his explosive first step, extraordinary leverage, and relentless pursuit allowed him to penetrate offensive lines before blockers could react. Quarterbacks rarely had time to step forward in the pocket because Donald consistently collapsed the interior, producing sacks, tackles for loss, and constant pressure from a position not typically associated with such production. Khalil Mack delivered a different form of defensive dominance through versatility and raw power. He could rush from the edge, set the edge against running plays, drop into coverage, and force turnovers through perfectly timed strip attempts. Offensive coordinators had to account for his presence on every snap because he could disrupt plays in multiple ways, whether by driving blockers backward or accelerating past them with explosive speed. Davante Adams provided the offensive counterpart through technical mastery at the receiver position. His ability to manipulate defensive backs with subtle footwork and route deception created consistent separation, allowing quarterbacks to trust him in both open field situations and tight red zone windows. Season after season, he produced elite reception and touchdown totals, establishing himself as one of the most dependable receiving threats of the era while helping redefine how precision route running could dominate modern passing attacks. 2020 NFL Draft. At a time when professional football had fully committed to high-volume passing attacks, the 2020 draft delivered two quarterbacks capable of leading explosive offenses, along with a receiver who rapidly established himself among the most dangerous playmakers in the sport. Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and Justin Jefferson represent a new generation of stars shaping the league's future. Joe Burrow entered the professional ranks following one of the most dominant college seasons ever recorded. His transition to the professional level showcased exceptional mental processing, precise timing on throws, and remarkable composure in chaotic situations. Burrow's pocket awareness allows him to maneuver around pressure while maintaining vision downfield, extending plays without sacrificing accuracy. Beyond his physical skills, his confidence and leadership quickly elevated expectations within his organization and transformed the offensive culture around him. Justin Herbert introduced a different type of quarterback presence through elite physical tools. His size, mobility, and powerful throwing arm allow him to stretch defenses vertically while still creating plays when protection breaks down. Herbert's rookie campaign produced record-level passing numbers for a first-year quarterback, proving he could adapt rapidly to the speed and complexity of professional defenses. His ability to deliver deep throws with ease gives his offense constant big play potential. Justin Jefferson provided the receiving counterpart that makes the draft group so compelling. From the beginning of his career, he demonstrated exceptional route precision, fluid body control, and outstanding ball tracking ability. Jefferson consistently creates separation against defensive backs, turning routine passing plays into explosive gains. His historic early production established him as the focal point of a passing attack and confirmed that the 2020 class delivered foundational offensive talent capable of shaping the league for years. 1958 NFL Draft. Some draft discussions revolve around several players contributing to a championship core. This era is remembered for a completely different reason. One player emerged whose dominance was so overwhelming that his presence alone reshaped expectations for the running back position. Jim Brown entered the league during a period when rushing production was important but rarely overwhelming, yet he immediately produced numbers that separated him dramatically from every other player in the sport. During the late 1950s, most offenses relied on balanced rushing attacks while operating within shorter seasons and lower statistical totals. Brown disrupted that structure almost instantly. Early in his career, he delivered performances that looked almost impossible for the era, including a record-setting single-game rushing performance as a rookie. These explosive outings demonstrated that he was not simply a productive runner, but a historical outlier, capable of producing record-breaking peaks on a regular basis. The 1958 season turned that early promise into undeniable dominance. Brown shattered the single-season rushing record by producing more than 1,500 yards in a 12-game schedule, an extraordinary achievement when compared with the offensive environment of the time. Averaging well over 100 rushing yards per game, he forced defenses to design entire game plans around stopping him and still managed to dominate. What made Brown nearly impossible to contain was the combination of physical power, acceleration through the second level, balance through contact, and the stamina to carry an enormous workload. Opponents knew he would receive the ball and still struggled to prevent explosive gains. That level of separation from the rest of the league is why Brown remains a central figure in discussions about the greatest running backs in football history. 1964 NFL Draft. The 1964 draft introduced Paul Krause, one of the most instinctive defensive backs the sport has ever seen. He entered the league with an extraordinary ability to read quarterbacks and track the football in flight. While many safeties of the era focused primarily on preventing deep passes, Krause turned the position into a weapon capable of stealing possessions and shifting momentum through constant takeaways. Professional offenses during the 1960s were expanding their passing concepts, but still attacked tighter throwing windows than modern systems. Safeties were expected to patrol deep zones, support the run near the line of scrimmage, and recognize developing routes with minimal margin for error. Krause possessed a rare instinct for anticipating where the ball would travel, allowing him to arrive at the perfect moment to intercept passes that other defenders might never reach. His impact appeared immediately. As a rookie, he led the entire league with 12 interceptions, an extraordinary accomplishment for a first-year defensive back. That early performance established the foundation for a career defined by unmatched ball production. Over time, he accumulated 81 interceptions, a total that still stands as the professional record and reflects both remarkable instincts and sustained excellence across many seasons. Krause's career demonstrates how a single defender can transform the rhythm of a game. Interceptions do more than stop drives. They shift field position, steal possessions, and create opportunities for the offense to score. By consistently generating those takeaways throughout his career, Krause became the gold standard for ball-hawking safeties and one of the most influential defensive backs ever to enter the league. 1998 NFL Draft. In the 1998 draft, Peyton Manning emerged as one of the most intellectually advanced quarterbacks in the sport, while Charles Woodson developed into one of the most versatile defensive backs of the modern era. Together, their careers helped shape professional football strategy throughout the following decade. Peyton Manning entered the league carrying enormous expectations because of his advanced understanding of offensive systems. From the beginning, he demonstrated an ability to read defensive alignments before the snap and adjust plays accordingly. Manning frequently altered protections, routes, and blocking assignments at the line of scrimmage, effectively acting as an on-field coordinator who controlled the rhythm of the offense. This command allowed him to operate passing attacks built on timing, anticipation, and relentless efficiency. Over the course of his career, he repeatedly led the league in passing production while guiding his franchise into consistent postseason contention. His influence encouraged many teams to empower their quarterbacks with greater responsibility for adjusting plays at the line of scrimmage. Charles Woodson provided the defensive counterbalance through remarkable versatility and football intelligence. He excelled in traditional cornerback coverage, shadowing elite receivers, while also contributing against the run and generating takeaways through sharp route recognition. Later in his career, he successfully transitioned into a safety role, demonstrating a level of adaptability rarely seen among defensive backs. His ability to influence games in multiple ways solidified his reputation as one of the most complete defenders of his era. 1999 NFL Draft. The 1999 NFL Draft brought to light offensive production and defensive control with two players whose careers highlighted opposite but equally important elements of roster construction. Edgerrin James developed into one of the most productive running backs of the early 2000s, while Champ Bailey evolved into a shutdown corner capable of eliminating opposing receivers. Their combined impact illustrates how a single draft can strengthen both offensive firepower and defensive stability. Edgerrin James entered the league with a skill set perfectly suited for a precision-based offense. His patience behind blockers allowed running lanes to develop before he accelerated through them, while his receiving ability added another dimension that forced defenses to account for him in multiple situations. Early in his career, he repeatedly finished among the league leaders in rushing yardage, carrying a heavy workload while remaining a central component of his offense. James also contributed as a receiver and pass protector, making him valuable on nearly every offensive snap. This versatility allowed coaches to maintain balance within their game plans, while still creating explosive opportunities through both rushing and passing situations. His consistent production established him as one of the most dependable running backs of his generation. Champ Bailey provided the defensive counterpart through elite coverage ability and exceptional athleticism. His speed, fluid movement, and ability to mirror receivers across complex route combinations allowed him to neutralize many of the league's most dangerous passing threats. Quarterbacks frequently avoided throwing toward his side of the field, which allowed defensive coordinators to allocate resources elsewhere and strengthen the overall structure of the defense. 2007 NFL Draft. The 2007 player class featured two athletes whose physical abilities stretched the boundaries of their positions. Adrian Peterson and Calvin Johnson entered the professional level with rare combinations of size, strength, and speed that few defenders could match. Rather than simply fitting into traditional positional roles, both players expanded expectations for how dominant a running back or wide receiver could become. Their careers helped define offensive football during the late 2000s and early 2010s. Adrian Peterson introduced a level of physical rushing rarely seen in the modern era. His acceleration through running lanes allowed him to reach top speed almost instantly, while his lower body strength enabled him to absorb contact without losing momentum. Early in his career, he produced one of the most remarkable single-game performances ever recorded, by rushing for nearly 300 yards, revealing a combination of breakaway speed and durability that made him capable of carrying an entire offense. At his peak, he delivered a season exceeding 2,000 rushing yards, earning the league's Most Valuable Player award, while facing defenses fully focused on stopping him. Calvin Johnson offered a completely different form of offensive dominance through extraordinary size and athleticism at receiver, standing taller and stronger than most defensive backs while maintaining elite straight-line speed. He created matchup problems that opposing defenses struggled to solve. Cornerbacks lacked the physical size to challenge him on contested catches, while safeties often could not match his acceleration downfield. Even when opponents assigned multiple defenders to his side of the field, Johnson continued to produce extraordinary receiving totals. Although both players relied on different skill sets, their influence on offensive football was equally powerful. Peterson demonstrated that a single elite runner could still control games through physical dominance, while Johnson established a new prototype for the modern elite receiver, capable of winning deep passes and contested catches with equal efficiency. Together, they represent one of the most visually dominant offensive pairings ever produced by a single player class. 1971 NFL Draft. In the early 1970s, teams were experimenting with more complex strategies, while television exposure brought the sport to a growing national audience. Within this environment, the 1971 player class delivered two individuals whose intelligence and technical mastery helped shape their franchises for years. Jack Ham developed into one of the most instinctive linebackers ever to patrol the middle of a defense. Instead of relying purely on brute force, he used anticipation and film study to diagnose plays before they unfolded. Ham frequently positioned himself perfectly to disrupt rushing attempts or step into passing lanes, demonstrating ball skills rarely seen from linebackers. His awareness allowed his defense to operate as a coordinated unit, built on discipline and anticipation. Ken Anderson provided a contrasting influence through precision passing and offensive efficiency. Operating within a system built around timing and rhythm, he relied on accuracy and quick decision-making rather than overwhelming arm strength. Anderson consistently delivered passes in stride, allowing receivers to maintain momentum and gain additional yardage after the catch. The significance of the 1971 group lies in how these two players elevated their franchises through intelligence rather than sheer athletic dominance. Ham helped anchor one of the most disciplined defensive units of the decade, while Anderson demonstrated that efficient timing offenses could rival more aggressive vertical passing attacks. 1963 NFL Draft. Mike Ditka entered professional football in 1963, a competitor who transformed the tight end position. He arrived at a time when tight ends were primarily blockers, responsible for supporting the running game. His arrival demonstrated that the position could also function as a powerful receiving threat capable of challenging defensive coverage schemes. Ditka possessed the size and strength required to perform traditional blocking responsibilities along the line of scrimmage. However, his receiving ability separated him from other players at the position. Strong hands and reliable route timing allowed him to secure passes in traffic, creating opportunities for significant gains in the middle of the field. These skills forced defenses to reconsider how they matched up against tight ends. Linebackers assigned to cover Ditka often struggled with his route discipline and physical strength, while defensive backs lacked the size to challenge him on contested catches. This mismatch created a strategic dilemma that offensive coordinators quickly learned to exploit. Instead of serving merely as secondary targets, tight ends could now become central elements of the passing attack. Ditka's success encouraged teams across the league to incorporate tight ends into more advanced passing concepts, including seam routes and crossing patterns designed to isolate larger receivers against linebackers. Over time, this evolution helped shape the modern tight end role, where players are expected to contribute both as blockers and as primary receiving threats. 1965 NFL Draft. During the mid-1960s, professional football existed in a competitive environment where two leagues fought for talent and public attention. In that landscape, a single electrifying player could transform a franchise's visibility and excitement. Gale Sayers arrived with extraordinary speed, agility, and instinctive vision that made him one of the most thrilling runners ever seen on a football field. Sayers possessed an explosive first step that allowed him to reach top speed almost immediately after receiving the ball. Once he entered open space, defenders frequently struggled to adjust their pursuit angles because he could change direction multiple times without losing momentum. His agility allowed him to weave through traffic with sudden cuts that left defenders grasping at empty air. His rookie season immediately demonstrated how dangerous he could be. Sayers produced touchdowns through rushing attempts, receptions, and special teams returns, showing rare versatility for a young player. One unforgettable performance included 6 touchdowns in a single game, an achievement that became one of the most celebrated individual displays in professional football history. Although injuries shortened his career, Sayers' peak seasons delivered some of the most visually spectacular plays the sport has ever produced. His ability to accelerate, cut, and outrun defenders turned ordinary rushing attempts into highlight runs that captivated fans and helped shape how future generations evaluated speed and agility at the running back position. 2012 NFL Draft. In 2012, Andrew Luck arrived with one of the most celebrated scouting profiles ever given to a quarterback prospect. Russell Wilson entered the league surrounded by skepticism about his physical size, and Luke Kuechly developed into one of the most intelligent defensive leaders of his generation. Their careers illustrate how success in professional football can emerge from very different backgrounds and skill sets. Andrew Luck quickly justified the extraordinary expectations surrounding him. His rare combination of arm strength, mobility, and advanced understanding of offensive structure allowed him to elevate his offense immediately. Luck thrived under pressure, often extending plays with movement outside the pocket while maintaining accuracy downfield. His leadership transformed a struggling roster into a competitive unit almost instantly, establishing him as one of the most respected quarterbacks of the early 2000s. Russell Wilson followed a completely different trajectory. Concerns about his height caused many evaluators to question whether he could operate effectively in a professional passing system. Once he reached the field, however, his precision passing, mobility, and calm decision-making quickly disproved those doubts. Wilson's efficiency and leadership helped guide his team to a championship, demonstrating that a quarterback's mental processing and competitive resilience can outweigh traditional scouting measurements. Luke Kuechly completed the class by serving as the intellectual center of his defense. His extraordinary ability to diagnose offensive formations allowed him to anticipate plays before they fully developed. Kuechly consistently arrived at the ball carrier with perfect timing, producing elite tackle totals while directing defensive adjustments across the field. His awareness and leadership made him one of the most respected defensive minds of his era. 1993 NFL Draft. Two stars whose careers illustrate the contrasting forces that shape football games were introduced in the NFL at the 1993 NFL Draft. Jerome Bettis became a symbol of physical rushing dominance, while Michael Strahan evolved into one of the most relentless pass rushers of his generation. Their impact on opposite sides of the field helped define competition during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Jerome Bettis earned his reputation through sheer physical power and balance. His size and leg strength allowed him to drive through defenders while maintaining forward momentum, turning short gains into consistent progress downfield. Bettis thrived in offenses designed to control possession and exhaust opposing defenses through long, methodical drives. Michael Strahan provided the defensive counterforce through relentless pressure on opposing quarterbacks. His explosive first step, refined hand techniques, and ability to bend around blockers allowed him to collapse the pocket with remarkable consistency. At his peak, he produced one of the most dominant pass rushing seasons ever recorded, establishing a record sack total that highlighted his disruptive ability. The legacy of this player class lies in how these two individuals demonstrated the importance of both offensive control and defensive disruption. Bettis embodied the power rushing style capable of wearing down opponents over 4 quarters, while Strahan represented the defensive nightmare who could change a game with a single explosive play. 2005 NFL Draft. In the 2005 draft, two figures emerged who transformed their franchises at the most valuable positions on the field. Aaron Rodgers developed into one of the most efficient quarterbacks of his generation, while DeMarcus Ware became a relentless edge defender, capable of collapsing an offense's entire protection scheme. Their combined influence illustrates how securing elite talent at quarterback and pass rusher can shape the direction of an organization for more than a decade. Aaron Rodgers' story began with one of the most dramatic draft night slides ever experienced by a top quarterback prospect. Multiple organizations passed on him before he was selected late in the first round by a team that already had an established veteran starter. Instead of rushing him onto the field, the coaching staff allowed Rodgers to spend several seasons studying defensive schemes, refining his mechanics, and adjusting to the speed of professional competition. When he finally assumed the starting role, he displayed remarkable poise, operating the offense with precision and confidence that reflected years of preparation. On the field, Rodgers combined several rare qualities that separated him from most quarterbacks. His accuracy allowed him to deliver deep passes along the sideline with remarkable consistency, while subtle movement inside the pocket helped him avoid pressure without abandoning the play. He also demonstrated the ability to release passes from unusual arm angles while maintaining velocity and placement. Over time, that skill set produced multiple award-winning seasons, deep postseason runs, and long-term stability at the most important position in football. DeMarcus Ware provided the defensive counterpart through relentless pressure off the edge. His explosive first step allowed him to reach offensive tackles before they fully established their stance, and his flexibility around the corner enabled him to collapse the pocket with speed. Ware also possessed a rare instinct for forcing fumbles during sack attempts, turning quarterback hits into sudden turnovers that shifted the momentum of games. Year after year, he remained among the league's most disruptive pass rushers, proving that a dominant edge defender can force offenses to alter entire protection strategies. 2013 NFL Draft. Offensive power best described the 2013 draft player group. It produced two offensive stars who challenged traditional defensive matchups in different ways. Travis Kelce developed into a tight end capable of functioning like a primary receiving threat, while DeAndre Hopkins emerged as a wide receiver known for securing passes in traffic, even when defenses knew the ball was heading his direction. Their contrasting skill sets placed constant pressure on defensive coordinators throughout the following decade. Travis Kelce arrived as a mid-round selection and quickly demonstrated that he could win routes with the fluid movement normally associated with wide receivers. Instead of relying solely on straight seam patterns, he displayed an advanced understanding of spacing within zone coverage, frequently settling into open areas at the precise moment his quarterback looked for a target. Once he secured the ball, his strength and balance allowed him to turn short receptions into significant gains after contact. Defensive coordinators faced difficult choices when attempting to cover Kelce. Linebackers struggled to keep pace with his sudden route breaks, while defensive backs often lacked the physical strength to challenge him near the catch point. As opponents shifted additional defenders toward him, space opened across the field for other receivers. This constant mismatch pressure helped place Kelce at the center of one of the most productive offensive eras in modern football. DeAndre Hopkins created a different type of challenge through elite ball skills and body control. His ability to secure passes while tightly covered allowed quarterbacks to trust him in difficult situations, such as third down or the red zone. Hopkins repeatedly demonstrated that strong hands, timing, and concentration could overcome heavy defensive attention, producing high-yardage seasons even when offensive circumstances around him changed. 1979 NFL Draft. The 1979 player class is remembered largely because of one remarkable selection that reshaped an organization's future. Joe Montana entered the league as a third-round choice rather than a highly celebrated prospect, yet he ultimately developed into the central figure of one of the most successful dynasties in professional football history. His rise illustrates how intelligence, composure, and precision can outweigh raw physical reputation. During the late 1970s, offensive philosophy was evolving toward more sophisticated passing systems. Quarterbacks were expected to read defensive alignments quickly and deliver the ball with precise timing rather than relying purely on arm strength. Montana excelled in that environment because of his anticipation and accuracy, frequently releasing passes before receivers had fully completed their routes. Another defining quality of Montana's game was his calm demeanor during critical moments. Whether facing heavy pressure or navigating late-game drives, he maintained steady decision-making that allowed his offense to operate with remarkable efficiency. This composure repeatedly produced scoring drives during decisive situations, building a reputation for clutch performance that few quarterbacks have matched. Montana's leadership eventually guided his franchise to multiple championships, while establishing a style of offense built on rhythm passing and intelligent ball distribution. The success of that approach influenced offensive systems throughout the league and reinforced the idea that a quarterback's mental processing and precision can define an entire era of football. 1995 NFL Draft. In 1995, NFL was introduced to two defenders whose combined presence helped create one of the most formidable defensive units of the early 2000s. Warren Sapp delivered relentless disruption along the interior line, while Derrick Brooks provided speed, awareness, and leadership from the linebacker position. Their partnership demonstrated how complementary defensive roles can elevate the performance of an entire unit. Warren Sapp changed expectations for interior defensive linemen through explosive penetration at the line of scrimmage. His quick first step allowed him to break through blocking schemes before offensive linemen could fully engage, collapsing the pocket directly in front of the quarterback. Pressure from the interior is particularly damaging because it limits escape routes and forces hurried decisions, making Sapp's presence a constant threat during passing situations. Derrick Brooks added another layer of defensive intelligence through his ability to read offensive formations. His anticipation allowed him to position himself ahead of developing plays, arriving at ball carriers with exceptional timing. Brooks also possessed the speed to cover receivers in space, an ability that became increasingly valuable as offenses expanded their passing attacks during the late 1990s. Together, Sapp and Brooks created a defensive structure built on disruption and awareness. One attacked the pocket with relentless force, while the other controlled the middle of the field through anticipation and coverage ability. Their synergy helped establish a defensive identity defined by speed, discipline, and opportunistic playmaking. 2018 NFL Draft. Multiple stars capable of shaping modern offense emerged from the 2018 draft pool. Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen emerged as two of the most influential quarterbacks of their generation, while Quentin Nelson developed into the most dominant interior offensive lineman of the era. Together, they represent the evolution of offensive football toward mobility, physicality, and protection built for explosive passing attacks. Lamar Jackson introduced a level of rushing explosiveness rarely seen from a quarterback. His open field speed and lateral agility allowed him to evade defenders with ease, turning broken plays into long gains, while forcing defenses to account for him as both a passer and a primary rushing threat. When his offense fully embraced this dual-threat style, Jackson delivered an extraordinary season that earned the league's Most Valuable Player award and demonstrated how dangerous a mobile quarterback could become within a tailored offensive system. Josh Allen expanded the concept of the dual-threat quarterback in a different direction through physical power and arm strength. Standing tall with the ability to throw deep passes across the field, Allen also possessed the size and strength to run through defenders when scrambling. Early in his career, he refined his mechanics and decision-making, eventually developing into one of the most productive passers in the league while maintaining the ability to extend plays with aggressive improvisation. Quentin Nelson provided the foundation that makes offensive explosions possible. His strength, leverage, and relentless intensity allowed him to dominate defenders at the point of attack, creating rushing lanes and protecting the quarterback from interior pressure. Elite guards rarely receive the same attention as quarterbacks, yet Nelson's presence transformed the effectiveness of the offensive line and established him as the premier interior blocker of his generation. 2000 NFL Draft. Few draft stories in professional football rival the unlikely rise that emerged from the 2000 player class. In the 6th round, long after most organizations had already selected quarterbacks or filled their roster priorities, Tom Brady was chosen with little fanfare. At the time, he was viewed as a developmental backup rather than a future star. What followed transformed not only a single franchise, but also the standards used to measure quarterback success. Early evaluations of Brady focused heavily on what he lacked compared with more celebrated prospects. Scouts questioned his mobility, doubted the strength of his arm, and viewed his athletic profile as ordinary. Because many teams prioritize physical traits when projecting quarterbacks, those concerns caused him to slide deep into the later rounds. Few expected that a player with such modest draft expectations would eventually dominate the sport for 2 decades. When opportunity finally arrived, Brady revealed that his greatest strengths existed in areas often overlooked during scouting. His preparation habits became legendary, built around extensive study of defensive tendencies and detailed understanding of offensive structure. That knowledge allowed him to identify coverages before the snap and deliver the ball quickly to the correct target, creating an offense built on efficiency and control. Over time, Brady combined precision passing with relentless competitiveness, guiding his teams to an unprecedented collection of championship victories. His calm decision-making in postseason situations and his ability to maintain elite performance deep into his career elevated him into a category of sustained excellence rarely seen in professional sports. From a sixth-round selection to the most decorated quarterback ever, the 2000 class produced the most remarkable value story the sport has ever witnessed. 2016 NFL Draft. In the NFL, talent can emerge far outside the earliest selections, as it was the case back in 2016. The draft pool produced two offensive figures whose careers highlight how transformational. Dak Prescott entered the league as a fourth-round quarterback with modest expectations, while Tyreek Hill arrived one round later, carrying the reputation of an extraordinary athlete still refining his receiving skills. Within a few seasons, both developed into central pieces of high-powered offenses. Dak Prescott's rise began when he unexpectedly stepped into a starting role earlier than planned. Instead of displaying the typical uncertainty of a young quarterback, he immediately showed command of the offense and calm decision-making. His ability to protect the football while directing efficient drives allowed the offense to operate with steady rhythm throughout his first season as a starter. As Prescott gained experience, he expanded his passing abilities and developed greater confidence attacking defenses downfield. His composure during critical moments, combined with clear communication with teammates, helped establish him as the emotional center of the offense. That leadership provided stability for a roster built around balance between passing efficiency and a powerful ground attack. Tyreek Hill transformed the vertical dimension of offense through unmatched acceleration and open field speed. Defensive backs quickly learned that even a small lapse in positioning could allow him to turn a short completion into a long touchdown. His versatility added further stress to opposing defenses because he could operate as a deep receiver, motion weapon, or return specialist capable of altering field position in seconds. Hill's presence forced defensive coordinators to devote additional coverage attention to deep areas of the field, creating space for the rest of the offense. 2004 NFL Draft. Eli Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, and Larry Fitzgerald are all a product of the 2004 draft and all developed into cornerstone figures whose careers extended well into the 2000s. Simply put, the draft class in 2004 reshaped the offensive landscape of the following decade by delivering three long-term franchise quarterbacks alongside one of the most complete wide receivers of the modern era. Eli Manning entered the league with intense scrutiny due to his football lineage and high draft position. Over time, he established himself as a calm and resilient leader, capable of delivering in the most pressured moments. His postseason performances defined his career, guiding his team through two championship runs and producing several unforgettable late-game drives that cemented his reputation as one of the most clutch quarterbacks of his generation. Ben Roethlisberger offered a completely different style of quarterback play. His imposing size and strength allowed him to escape pressure and extend plays outside the pocket, often turning broken situations into explosive downfield throws. He delivered immediate success early in his career and eventually led Pittsburgh to multiple championships while remaining one of the most durable and productive passers of the era. Phillip Rivers added another dimension through relentless competitiveness and consistent production within complex passing systems. His quick release and command of offensive adjustments allowed him to maintain high passing totals year after year. At the same time, Larry Fitzgerald developed into the class's premier receiving weapon. His reliable hands, body control, and dominance in contested catches produced elite production across a remarkably long career, highlighted by one of the most explosive postseason receiving performances ever recorded. The Wildcat Offense Revolution. The Wildcat Offense entered the league framed as something far bigger than a creative wrinkle. It carried the suggestion that an entire approach could function without relying on a conventional signal caller. Instead of centering everything around a passer, reading coverage, and delivering throws, This approach shifted decision-making to versatile runners who could threaten defenses in multiple ways immediately after the snap. It challenged long-standing assumptions about alignment, spacing, and how numbers were distributed across the field. Although direct snap concepts had existed for decades, their usage at the professional level had rarely extended beyond occasional gadget plays. That changed dramatically early in the 2008 season when Miami unveiled the idea with unusual commitment. During a matchup against New England, Ronnie Brown lined up to receive the snap, turning each play into a layered decision: keep the ball, hand it off, or attack through the air. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Miami controlled the game from start to finish, producing a lopsided victory that caught one of the league's most disciplined defenses completely off guard. That performance triggered rapid imitation across the league. Coaches saw an opportunity to manipulate defensive alignment by adding an extra blocker, forcing hesitation through motion, and creating angles that traditional formations rarely produced. Teams across multiple divisions began installing their own versions, experimenting with different personnel, and expanding the concept in search of similar success. For a short stretch, it appeared as though offenses had uncovered a structural advantage, something capable of disrupting even well-prepared units simply through design. The decline, however, followed just as quickly. As more film accumulated, defensive coordinators shifted their approach, focusing on discipline rather than reaction. Edges were sealed, responsibilities were maintained, and opponents increasingly forced these packages into situations that required consistent throwing. Without a reliable aerial component, drives stalled and flexibility disappeared. What initially looked like a transformative concept settled into a limited role, useful in specific moments, but incapable of sustaining a full offensive identity. Philadelphia Eagles' Dream Team. In 2011, Philadelphia assembled a roster that did not just signal ambition, it created a level of expectation that left no room for anything but dominance. The team already had explosive pieces in place, with Michael Vick orchestrating an offense built on speed and improvisation, supported by LaShawn McCoy's versatility and vertical threats stretching defenses. Instead of refining that core, management pushed aggressively during a chaotic offseason, stacking the roster with high-profile additions meant to elevate every level of the team simultaneously. The defensive side received the most attention. Nnamdi Asomugha arrived with a reputation for eliminating top receivers. Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie added athletic coverage ability, and the front seven gained reinforcements like Jason Babin and Cullen Jenkins. On paper, the setup looked complete, impacting players at key positions, depth across the lineup, and the appearance of balance. Then, a single phrase shifted everything. Vince Young labeled the group a dream team, and instantly, perception changed. This was no longer a contender. It was a unit expected to dominate weekly. Once games began, those expectations quickly collided with reality. The defense, despite its talent, struggled to function cohesively. Within schemes that did not suit his strengths, Asomugha dealt with frequent coverage breakdowns, while communication issues revealed weaknesses not apparent on paper. On the offensive side, big play potential remained, but consistency never followed. Vick's aggressive decision-making produced costly turnovers, while protection issues disrupted rhythm and stalled drives that should have produced points. That season was shaped less by ability and more by the absence of cohesion. Close contests repeatedly slipped away through late-game mistakes, poor situational execution, and defensive lapses at critical moments. A 1-4 start buried the team under its own expectations, and although they recovered to finish 8-8, the outcome felt far worse than the record suggested. The collapse revealed a fundamental truth. Assembling talent does not guarantee functionality. Without chemistry and alignment between personnel and scheme, even the most promising roster can unravel under its own weight. Jacksonville Jaguars Sacksonville Project. Jacksonville's rise in 2017 didn't come with hype. It developed through years of deliberate roster building, focused almost entirely on defense. High draft selections and targeted acquisitions produced a unit built on speed, aggression, and confidence. Jalen Ramsey brought elite coverage and swagger. A.J. Bouye provided stability opposite him, and the defensive front, anchored by Calais Campbell and powered by Yannick Ngakoue, created relentless pressure. It went beyond a strong defense. It was a unit that could take control of entire games. That dominance translated directly into results. The Jaguars overwhelmed opponents, led the league in sacks, and consistently forced turnovers that shifted momentum instantly. Their identity became clear: dictate pace, shorten games, and let the defense create opportunities. That formula carried them to a 10-6 record and deep into the postseason. Wins over Buffalo and Pittsburgh showcased how disruptive they could be, turning takeaways and field position into decisive advantages. For a moment, everything aligned. In the AFC Championship game, Jacksonville held a fourth-quarter lead against New England, sitting just minutes away from a Super Bowl appearance. But when that game slipped away, it revealed how fragile the setup actually was. Beneath the defensive dominance, the offense lacked reliability. Led by Blake Bortles, it depended heavily on the running game and favorable situations created by the defense. When those conditions weren't perfect, production dropped sharply. That vulnerability became clear in 2018. Turnovers declined, opponents adjusted their approach, and games required sustained offensive execution rather than short field opportunities. Without consistent scoring, losses began to stack up, and frustration surfaced inside the locker room. The cohesion that fueled the previous season faded, key players eventually moved on, and the identity disappeared quickly. Sacksonville showed how far a defense can carry a team, but it also highlighted the difficulty of sustaining success without stability at quarterback once the margin for error disappears. Rams post greatest show on turf reload. At the start of the 2000s, St. Louis built an offensive approach that reshaped how the game could be played. Precision passing, speed across every position, and perfect timing allowed the unit to overwhelm defenses. Kurt Warner distributed the ball with efficiency. Marshall Faulk controlled tempo as both runner and receiver, and wideouts like Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt stretched coverage to its limits. At its height, the attack did more than succeed. It controlled how opponents approached the game. The challenge came after that peak faded. Instead of transitioning into a new identity, the organization attempted to extend the same formula into a changing league. Rebuilding was not the objective. Preservation was. When Warner struggled with injuries and turnovers, Mark Bulger stepped in and produced strong statistical seasons, giving the impression that the offense still worked. But there was a clear difference between output and control. The offense generated numbers, yet it no longer overwhelmed opponents the same way. Over time, the foundation weakened, key contributors aged, injuries accumulated, and the offensive line lost stability. Meanwhile, defensive schemes across the league evolved. Concepts that once created confusion, spread formations, quick timing routes, spacing advantages, became standard practice. What had once provided a unique edge no longer separated them from the rest of the league. Without that advantage, execution had to be perfect, and increasingly, it was not. The imbalance across the roster accelerated the decline. While attention remained on offensive production, the defense struggled to keep pace, forcing high-scoring situations where any inconsistency proved costly. By the late 2000s, the drop-off was clear. The approach slowly lost relevance as conditions changed. The issue lay not in the design, but in the lack of adaptation. The league evolved, the personnel shifted, and the attempt to hold on to a past formula delayed the transition that eventually became unavoidable. Thursday Night Football expansion. Expanding Thursday Night Football initially appeared to be an obvious success for the league. More games meant increased revenue, greater visibility, and another primetime slot to capture national attention. Early experiments, particularly Thanksgiving matchups, had drawn strong audiences, creating the impression that a full-season rollout would only amplify that success. On the surface, it looked like a simple extension of an already popular product. The problem emerged the moment the schedule expanded across the season. Football relies heavily on recovery and preparation, and the shift to Thursday created a compressed timeline that disrupted both. Teams were forced to transition from Sunday games to another matchup within just a few days. Players still dealing with physical strain had limited time to heal, while coaches lost valuable preparation windows needed to install detailed game plans. That strain showed up immediately on the field. Execution dropped noticeably, particularly on offense where timing and coordination are critical. Passing attacks looked disjointed, blocking assignments broke down more frequently, and rhythm never fully developed. Instead of high-level performance, many games felt uneven and rushed. The issue extended beyond visual quality. It reflected a structural limitation within the schedule itself. As concerns grew, player safety became a central topic. Short recovery periods increased vulnerability to injuries, especially those tied to fatigue and incomplete healing. Coaches simplified strategies due to time constraints, reducing tactical depth and making matchups more predictable. Despite these issues, the league continued expanding the format through new broadcast deals and streaming partnerships. While the platform grew, the perception remained mixed. Thursday games never consistently reached the level expected, exposing how dependent the sport is on preparation and recovery to maintain its highest standard. Jamarcus Russell, #1 pick, collapse. Holding the first overall pick in 2007, Oakland selected Jamarcus Russell in a decision that carried the weight of a franchise reset, built largely on physical potential. At LSU, he displayed rare arm strength, effortlessly launching deep throws without needing perfect mechanics, and combining that with size that suggested durability and presence in the pocket. Evaluators saw someone who could stretch defenses in ways very few quarterbacks could, creating the expectation that he could transform an entire offensive approach through sheer ability. That trajectory began to unravel before it properly started. Russell's rookie season was delayed by a contract holdout that kept him away from training camp and early team activities, costing him critical time needed to learn the playbook, build timing with teammates, and adjust to the speed of professional defenses. By the time he stepped onto the field, he was already behind, trying to absorb a complex playbook while also competing at a level that typically requires a full offseason of preparation. Once he began playing, flashes of his talent were visible, but they never formed a consistent foundation. Conditioning became a persistent issue, with reports of him arriving at camp out of shape, affecting mobility, stamina, and overall execution. At a position where footwork and timing are essential, those physical limitations quickly translated into mechanical breakdowns. More concerning were questions about preparation. Stories circulated suggesting a lack of engagement with film study, including widely discussed incidents where coaches believed he had not reviewed assigned material, despite claiming otherwise. Whether exaggerated or not, those reports shaped how the organization viewed his development. On the field, those underlying problems became clear. Accuracy fluctuated, particularly on intermediate routes that require anticipation rather than arm strength, and decision-making lagged behind defensive adjustments. Occasional highlight throws couldn't offset stalled drives and missed opportunities. By his third season, the gap between expectation and reality was undeniable, and in 2010, Oakland released him. What made this collapse so striking was how little progress ever stabilized. His career became a reference point for how physical traits alone cannot carry a quarterback without discipline, preparation, and continuous growth. Johnny Manziel, failed project. Cleveland used a first-round pick in the 2014 draft on Johnny Manziel. At the time, the decision carried a level of attention rarely seen for a quarterback prospect. At Texas A&M, he had turned improvisation into a consistent weapon, extending plays, escaping pressure, and creating explosive moments that felt unpredictable but effective. His approach did not fit the traditional quarterback mold, but his production pointed to a different dimension at the professional level, particularly for a franchise that had struggled for years to find stability at the position. From the beginning, there was a clear tension between his college success and the demands of the NFL. At Texas A&M, space and tempo allowed him to react freely, turning broken plays into gains. In the NFL, those windows closed much faster. Defenders recovered quicker, coverage tightened, and the margin for improvisation shrank significantly. What once looked like creativity began to look like inconsistency when forced into a faster, more demanding environment that required precise reads and disciplined execution. That transition exposed mechanical and structural challenges. His footwork, already inconsistent in college, became more problematic under pressure, affecting accuracy and timing. Reliance on improvisation made it difficult to sustain drives because success depended on unpredictable moments rather than repeatable execution. At the same time, concerns about preparation and focus began to surface. Reports about practice habits and film study, combined with off-field distractions, created an environment where development never fully aligned with expectations placed on a first-round quarterback. His time in Cleveland reflected that instability. Performances showed occasional flashes but lacked continuity, and the offense often struggled to find rhythm when he was on the field. Even as the team itself dealt with broader issues, the central problem remained unchanged. He never fully transitioned from an improvisational style to a controlled, consistent approach suited for the league. By the end of the 2015 season, Cleveland moved on, closing a brief tenure that highlighted how talent and attention alone cannot replace adaptation and cohesion. Tim Tebow experiment that divided the league. Tim Tebow entered professional football with one of the most accomplished college careers in recent memory, built on leadership, physical running ability, and consistent success at Florida. However, even during that run, questions persisted about how his mechanics and passing style would translate. His throwing motion was longer than typical quarterbacks, and his accuracy on timing routes was inconsistent, raising concerns about how he would operate within a scheme that relies heavily on precision and rhythm. Early in his career, Denver attempted to use him within a more traditional offensive scheme, which quickly exposed those limitations. Passing struggles became more visible, and there was uncertainty about how to build a plan that maximized his strengths. That changed during the 2011 season when the team adjusted its philosophy, leaning into a run-heavy system that incorporated option elements, allowing Tebow to use his mobility as a central feature rather than forcing him into a conventional passing role. The results were unusual but effective under specific conditions. Games were controlled through defense, field position, and late-game execution. Tebow led a series of dramatic fourth-quarter comebacks, creating a stretch where the team continued to win despite low passing efficiency. That momentum carried into the playoffs, highlighted by an overtime victory against Pittsburgh that reinforced the idea that the approach could succeed when everything aligned properly. Despite those moments, the underlying limitations never disappeared. The offense struggled to sustain consistent production, relying heavily on situational success rather than steady execution. As defenses adjusted, focusing on containment and forcing passing situations, predictability increased. Without a reliable aerial component, the offense became easier to prepare for. Denver's decision to acquire Peyton Manning after the season effectively ended the experiment, confirming that while it could produce short-term success, it lacked the flexibility required for long-term sustainability. Brandon Weeden, quarterback project. At 28, Brandon Weeden entered the league with expectations fundamentally different from most rookies. The logic behind the pick was clear. He was supposed to be more polished, more mature, and ready to contribute immediately, reducing the need for a long developmental process that younger quarterbacks typically require. That belief came from his unconventional path. After spending years in professional baseball, he returned to football and produced strong numbers at Oklahoma State, operating effectively in a high-scoring offense. His experience was framed as an advantage, suggesting that he had already developed the composure and understanding needed to transition quickly to the professional level. Rather than long-term growth, Cleveland targeted immediate stability at a position that had lacked consistency. Once he stepped onto the field, that expectation began to break down. The speed and complexity of the NFL exposed limitations in processing and adaptability. While he had the arm strength to make required throws, he struggled to move through progressions quickly, and when his initial read was taken away, the offense often stalled. Pressure affected him significantly, and his movement within the pocket lacked fluidity, making it difficult to recover when plays broke down. The surrounding environment added to the difficulty, but the core issue remained unchanged. The readiness that justified the selection never fully appeared, and inconsistency persisted throughout his tenure. Within a short period, Cleveland began shifting toward other options, effectively ending the experiment. The significance here came from more than a missed evaluation. It pointed to a flawed premise. The idea that age could replace development proved incorrect, and the team remained in the same cycle of instability they were trying to escape. Josh Rosen's rapid collapse. Josh Rosen entered the 2018 draft as a quarterback known for polish, timing, and comfort operating within structured passing concepts. At UCLA, he demonstrated footwork and anticipation that aligned with traditional expectations for the position, leading many evaluators to view him as one of the more ready prospects. When he slipped to the 10th overall pick and remarked that there were 9 mistakes ahead of me, it created a narrative of motivation and expectation that followed him into the league. Arizona selected him hoping to establish stability following Carson Palmer's retirement, viewing him as a quarterback who could organize and distribute within a traditional offense. However, the environment he entered was highly unstable. The offensive line struggled, the running game lacked consistency, and the overall design of the offense failed to create reliable support. Coaching changes during the season only added to that instability, making it difficult for any quarterback to develop within that environment. Even with that context, Rosen struggled to provide consistent flashes of long-term potential. Pressure disrupted his rhythm, and without the ability to consistently create outside of structure, he often appeared limited when plays broke down. The qualities that made him appealing, precision and timing, were difficult to display without a stable foundation, and the offense rarely provided those conditions. The defining moment came after just one season, when Arizona selected Kyler Murray with the 1st overall pick, effectively moving on immediately. That decision reshaped how the league viewed Rosen, signaling a loss of confidence that spread quickly. Subsequent opportunities failed to reverse that trajectory, and his career shifted from franchise foundation to uncertain role. What makes this case stand out is the speed of the collapse. Within a year, a top 10 selection was replaced, illustrating how quickly expectations can change when development and environment fail to align. Sam Darnold, swallowed by the Jets. New York's decision in 2018 to select Sam Darnold 3rd overall carried the feeling of long-awaited stability at a position that had defined years of inconsistency. At USC, he showed creativity, toughness, and the ability to produce outside the designed play, often turning broken plays into positive outcomes. Even with imperfections, his natural feel for the position supported a clear long-term projection. The organization did more than draft talent. It backed the idea of future control at quarterback. Early signs supported that optimism. There were moments where his instincts stood out, particularly when plays broke down and he had to create. He could escape pressure, throw on the move, and generate production in difficult situations. Those flashes sustained belief, because they suggested that with time and development, he could grow into a complete player who balanced improvisation with structure. The problem was the environment never allowed that transition to take shape. The roster lacked consistent offensive support, protection issues remained, and the overall setup failed to provide stability. Instead of refining his strengths, the setting often pushed him further into them without control. Turnovers continued, decision-making stayed uneven, and the offense struggled to find rhythm. The arrival of Adam Gase was expected to bring stability, but the system rarely aligned with what Darnold did well, creating a disconnect between quarterback and design. The defining moment of his tenure came during a 2019 game against New England, when he was heard saying, "I'm seeing ghosts," a phrase that quickly became attached to his entire experience. While it reflected one difficult night against an elite defense, it symbolized a broader issue: a talented passer overwhelmed by pressure and instability. By the end of 2020, the organization reset again, trading him and starting over. Zach Wilson's modern franchise gamble. At BYU Zach Wilson, he displayed arm talent, mobility, and the ability to create off-platform throws that fit the league's evolving preference for dynamic playmakers. His highlights suggested a player who could operate both within and outside the play design, making him an ideal fit for a scheme built on flexibility and movement. That projection carried an underlying risk. Much of his college success came with time and space, allowing him to extend plays and deliver throws late in the down. At the professional level, those conditions rarely exist consistently. From the start, the challenge became balancing improvisation with timing-based execution inside a structured offense designed around rhythm and quick decisions. The transition proved uneven almost immediately. Footwork and timing often fell out of sync with the scheme, creating pressure where none initially existed. Short and intermediate accuracy, critical for sustaining drives, became inconsistent. As struggles increased, he leaned more heavily on off-schedule play, but those attempts produced mixed results against faster defenses that closed space quickly and punished mistakes more aggressively. What ultimately defined the project was the absence of steady progression. Across multiple seasons, the same issues persisted. Mechanics remained unstable, decision-making fluctuated, and the offense rarely felt under full control. As the roster improved elsewhere, the gap at quarterback became more visible. The decision to bring in Aaron Rodgers signaled a shift away from that trajectory, confirming that the development curve had not aligned with expectations. Trey Lance, first-round picks gamble. San Francisco's decision to trade multiple first-round selections to draft Trey Lance, third overall in 2021, marked one of the most aggressive quarterback investments in recent years. The decision extended past adding a player, centering on a commitment of future resources to a projection. Lance offered size, mobility, and arm strength, along with a college profile that emphasized ball security and dual threat potential. That projection came with a critical limitation: limited experience. Due to circumstances including the nature of his college program and schedule disruptions, he entered the league with far fewer starts than most prospects taken that high. This meant the team was investing in development rather than immediate production, requiring time, repetition, and a controlled transition into the starting role. The initial plan reflected that approach, with Jimmy Garoppolo remaining in place while Lance was gradually integrated. Flashes of his physical ability appeared, but inconsistency in mechanics, timing, and processing highlighted how much refinement was still needed. The following season was meant to mark his transition into the starting role, but an early injury disrupted that process before it could stabilize. That disruption changed everything. With Lance sidelined, other quarterbacks stepped in and executed the offense effectively, shifting the team's trajectory toward immediate competitiveness. The opportunity for extended development disappeared, and without consistent game reps, the gap between potential and performance remained. Rather than a typical failure, the necessary conditions never came together with this project, with investment, timing, and circumstance never aligning. Chip Kelly collapsed system. Chip Kelly's offense at Oregon had overwhelmed opponents through pace, spacing, and constant pressure, creating an expectation that similar concepts could disrupt professional defenses. Early results supported that belief, as the Eagles moved quickly, dictated tempo, and forced opponents into uncomfortable situations. The system's success extended beyond play design. Kelly emphasized conditioning, recovery, and sports science, introducing methods that focused on optimizing performance through measurable processes. Initially, those ideas were praised, and the offense produced at a high level. However, as his influence expanded, control extended into roster decisions, shifting the focus from adapting schemes to players toward reshaping players to fit the scheme. That shift created long-term issues. Established contributors were replaced with personnel chosen for fit rather than proven production, altering the balance of the roster. At the same time, the tempo that once created advantages began to expose weaknesses. Quick possessions, whether successful or not, left the defense on the field more frequently, leading to fatigue and late-game struggles. Without the element of surprise, execution had to carry the approach, and inconsistency became more visible. By his third season, the disconnect between philosophy and results was clear, and the organization moved on. Urban Meyer's college system. Jacksonville's decision to hire Urban Meyer came with expectations that his college success would translate into a professional environment. With multiple championships and a reputation for building dominant programs, he was seen as someone who could establish stability and culture quickly. Pairing him with Trevor Lawrence, the first overall pick, created the vision of a coordinated rebuild built on leadership and development. The transition exposed fundamental differences between levels. In college, top programs often operate with talent advantages and centralized control. The NFL requires a different approach, where players are established professionals and competitive balance is tighter. Methods that rely heavily on authority and rigid control do not translate easily into that environment. Early signs of tension emerged quickly. Reports indicated friction within the organization, with communication style and operational approach failing to resonate. On the field, the offense struggled to develop identity or rhythm, and Lawrence's development was affected by an approach that lacked consistency. Instead of simplifying the game for a rookie quarterback, the environment added complexity. Off-field issues compounded those challenges, creating distractions that further destabilized the organization. Unlike typical coaching tenures that decline gradually, this situation unraveled rapidly. The team moved on before the season ended, closing a brief and turbulent chapter. Josh McDaniels' collapse as a head coach. Denver hired Josh McDaniels in 2009, given his proximity to sustained success. As part of New England's offensive operation, he had worked within a framework known for efficiency, adaptability, and consistent production under Bill Belichick. That background created a powerful assumption that he could transfer those principles into a head coaching role and build something similar from the ground up. The early results appeared to confirm that belief. Denver opened the season 6-0, showing discipline, cohesion, and balanced performance. The offense operated efficiently, the defense made timely plays, and the team looked organized. For a brief stretch, it felt like a seamless transition from coordinator success to full organizational control. That momentum masked deeper structural issues. McDaniels attempted to replicate elements of the New England model, not just schematically, but culturally. The challenge was that the original model functioned within an established environment built over years, while Denver lacked that foundation. Tension began to grow, particularly around roster decisions and relationships within the locker room. The turning point came with the handling of quarterback Jay Cutler, where conflict led to a trade that signaled a shift toward reshaping the roster entirely around the coach's vision. From there, performance declined, internal friction increased, and stability disappeared. The effort unraveled before any long-term foundation could form, reinforcing how success in one environment doesn't automatically carry over without the same supporting conditions. Adam Gase, the failed offensive genius. Adam Gase's rise as a head coach was built largely on association with elite quarterback play, most notably during his time working alongside Peyton Manning in Denver. That connection created a strong perception that he possessed a unique ability to design high-level offensive stats and elevate quarterback performance. In a league constantly searching for innovation, that reputation carried significant weight. In Miami, his first season created cautious optimism. The team reached the playoffs, and there was a sense that the offense had gained stability. However, even during that stretch, the production did not consistently reflect the explosive identity many expected. It functioned, but it did not dominate, leaving questions about whether the reputation matched the results. As time passed, those questions became more prominent. Offensive consistency never fully developed, and the design often appeared rigid rather than adaptable. Quarterback play fluctuated, drives stalled, and the unit lacked a clear identity. Instead of adjusting to personnel strengths, the approach frequently felt disconnected from them, limiting overall effectiveness. His tenure with the Jets reinforced those concerns. Tasked with developing Sam Darnold, the expectation was that his expertise would produce visible growth. Instead, the offense looked static, predictable, and out of sync with the quarterback's skill set. Over time, the gap between perception and production became undeniable, turning what was once seen as innovation into a clear example of misattributed success. Hue Jackson. Organizational collapse. Hue Jackson took over in Cleveland with the franchise already in the middle of a long-term rebuild focused on reshaping the roster and accumulating future assets. He was brought in to guide that transition, manage young talent, and create a foundation that could eventually support sustained success. The expectation wasn't immediate winning, but there was an expectation of visible progress. The 2016 season ended with a 1-15 record, which, in isolation, could be explained by the early stages of rebuilding. Teams undergoing major transitions often struggle initially, and there is usually patience built into that process. However, instead of improvement, the following season produced an even more extreme outcome, 0-16. That combined 1-31 stretch went beyond typical rebuilding struggles. The team showed moments of competitiveness, but those moments rarely translated into results. Close games slipped away, execution in key situations broke down, and the offense never developed consistency despite constant changes at quarterback. While roster limitations were significant, the lack of visible progression became the defining issue. Over time, the losing streak affected more than just performance. It impacted confidence, cohesion, and overall organizational stability. Questions about leadership and alignment surfaced, and the environment became increasingly difficult to sustain. By 2018, the organization moved in a different direction, ending a period that became a reference point for how rebuilding can fail when development and direction never align. Arizona Cardinals' Air Raid Project. Arizona's 2019 decision to hire Cliff Kingsbury represented a commitment to an idea rather than a proven track record. His tenure at Texas Tech had been inconsistent, but the focus wasn't on results, it was on philosophy. The Air Raid offense, known for spacing, tempo, and simplified reads, had produced success at the college level by stretching defenses and creating quick decision-making opportunities. That commitment became even clearer when the team selected Kyler Murray first overall. His mobility, arm strength, and ability to throw on the move aligned perfectly with the design of the offense. The offense immediately looked different, using wide formations and quick passing concepts to create rhythm and space. Early flashes suggested the approach could translate, especially as talent around Murray improved. However, as more film became available, defenses began adjusting. Coverage tightened, timing was disrupted, and Murray was forced into longer plays outside the system's comfort zone. The same simplicity that made the offense effective early on also made it easier to predict once opponents understood its tendencies. Late-season declines became a recurring pattern, highlighting the difficulty of sustaining that approach. Over time, reliance on Murray's individual playmaking increased, placing pressure on him to compensate for structural limitations. When the approach worked, it amplified his strengths. When it failed to, the offense struggled to adapt. Eventually, the organization moved on, marking the end of the project. It did not fail because the concept lacked value. It failed because it could not evolve fast enough to maintain its advantage at the professional level.
Albert Haynesworth, $100 million gamble. Washington's 2009 signing of Albert Haynesworth was intended to transform the defense instantly. At his peak in Tennessee, he had been one of the most disruptive interior linemen in football, capable of collapsing the pocket and controlling both the run and passing game. The contract reflected that belief, making him one of the highest-paid defensive players at the time. A coaching change quickly altered the situation, bringing in a different defensive scheme. The new setup moved away from his ability to attack upfield and demanded adjustments that did not match his strengths. That mismatch reduced his impact and created tension between player and scheme from the beginning. Conditioning issues further complicated the situation.
Failing fitness tests early in his tenure raised concerns about preparation and commitment, particularly given the scale of the investment. On the field, his performance showed occasional flashes of ability, but never matched the expectations attached to his contract. Off the field, the relationship between the organization and the player deteriorated. Reports of conflict and frustration became more frequent, turning the situation into a broader breakdown rather than a simple performance issue. The team eventually moved on, and the deal became a lasting example of how talent, without alignment in approach and system, cannot justify even the largest investment. Le'Veon Bell, paying for production that never returned. When New York signed Le'Veon Bell, the expectation extended beyond adding a productive running back. It was about acquiring a unique offensive weapon. In Pittsburgh, his running style stood out because of its patience and timing. Instead of attacking gaps immediately, he would hesitate behind the line, allowing blocks to develop before accelerating through openings. That approach, combined with receiving ability, made him central to an offense built around rhythm and coordination. His arrival came with additional complexity. Bell had sat out the entire 2018 season due to a contract dispute, meaning he entered free agency without recent game action. While that absence reduced physical wear, it also created uncertainty about how quickly he could return to peak performance. New York still committed heavily, viewing him as a player capable of elevating the offense while supporting a young quarterback. The fit, however, never aligned. Unlike Pittsburgh, the Jets lacked an offensive line capable of sustaining the timing required for his style. The patience that once created opportunities turned into hesitation without proper blocking, leaving him waiting for lanes that never fully developed. At the same time, the scheme failed to consistently use his versatility as both a runner and receiver, limiting his overall impact. Within a struggling offensive setup, his production declined noticeably. Explosive plays decreased, efficiency dropped, and the expected transformation never materialized. Over time, the financial investment no longer matched the output, leading to his release. It was not ability that caused the failure, but context. The Jets paid for a version of Bell that relied on conditions they never recreated. Denver Broncos, $245 million. Commitment. Denver's decision to trade for Russell Wilson represented an attempt to solve a long-standing issue at quarterback that had persisted since Peyton Manning's departure. The roster had talent, particularly on defense, but lacked stability under center. Wilson, with a Super Bowl victory and consistent success in Seattle, was seen as the missing piece who could bring everything together. The commitment reflected that belief. Denver gave up significant assets and followed it with a massive $245 million extension before he completed a full season with the team. This was not a cautious move. It was a full investment in the idea that Wilson would anchor the franchise for years. Expectations rose immediately, shifting from improvement to contention. From the start, the offense failed to match that vision. Timing appeared inconsistent, communication lacked clarity, and drives stalled frequently. The approach under head coach Nathaniel Hackett never fully aligned with Wilson's strengths, creating a disconnect between design and execution. Instead of elevating the unit, the quarterback often looked out of rhythm within it. As struggles continued, the gap between expectation and performance became more pronounced. The offense ranked among the least productive in the league, placing pressure on a strong defense to compensate. Even after coaching changes, the initial impact had already reshaped how the move was viewed. The project struggled because success from one environment did not transfer seamlessly into another without proper alignment. Cleveland Browns. Fully guaranteed gamble. Cleveland made one of the most aggressive quarterback moves in recent NFL history when they traded for Deshaun Watson. The roster had improved significantly, with talent across multiple positions, but the team still lacked consistent production at quarterback. Watson's ability in Houston, creating plays under pressure and producing at a high level, made him an attractive solution. The move was shaped as much by the contract that followed as by the trade itself. Cleveland signed him to a fully guaranteed deal exceeding $200 million, removing financial flexibility and tying the organization's future directly to his performance. That level of commitment signaled absolute confidence, leaving little margin for gradual development or adjustment. The transition proved uneven. After time away from competition, timing and rhythm were inconsistent, affecting overall offensive efficiency. Instead of seamlessly integrating into an already functional setup, the offense had to adjust around him, disrupting what had previously worked. The expected immediate impact never fully appeared. With a competitive roster already in place, the focus remained on the quarterback position. Every performance was evaluated against the scale of the investment, and inconsistency became more visible. This went beyond talent, blending risk with commitment. And when alignment came slowly, the consequences reshaped the franchise's direction. Miami Dolphins' 2000s quarterback decision. In the mid-2000s, Miami faced a critical decision at quarterback, choosing between two players recovering from injury, Drew Brees and Dante Culpepper. Both options carried uncertainty, requiring the organization to project future performance under incomplete information. The choice would shape the franchise for years. Brees had demonstrated accuracy, leadership, and efficiency in San Diego, but concerns about his shoulder injury created hesitation. Culpepper, with a strong track record in Minnesota, offered a different profile: size, arm strength, and mobility. Miami ultimately chose Culpepper, believing his physical traits and recovery outlook provided a better balance of risk. The outcome quickly diverged from expectations. Culpepper struggled to regain his previous level of performance, and the offense never stabilized around him. Meanwhile, Brees signed with New Orleans and developed into one of the most productive quarterbacks in league history, leading the Saints to sustained success and a championship. The contrast defined the decision. The story was not only about one option failing, but about the alternative emerging as a franchise cornerstone elsewhere. Miami's search for stability continued, extending a cycle they had hoped to end. Quarterback evaluation remains one of the toughest challenges in football, with unavoidable uncertainty and consequences from a wrong decision capable of shaping an entire era. Vikings' Kirk Cousins experiment. Minnesota's 2018 signing of Kirk Cousins was presented as a calculated upgrade rather than a high-risk gamble. During the 2018 season, Minnesota's roster already looked complete after a deep playoff run in 2017 with a strong defense and productive skill players. The belief inside the organization was simple: add consistency at quarterback, and everything else could rise with it. Cousins, known for accuracy and structured execution, fit that vision. The contract reflected total commitment. By offering a fully guaranteed deal, the team showed it was not simply adding competition, but committing to build around him right away. Early returns matched expectations in certain areas. The passing game became more controlled, production remained steady, and the offense operated with a level of reliability that had been missing. Over time, however, a disconnect emerged between output and impact. Production held steady on paper, yet high-leverage moments exposed a ceiling. Against top opponents, the offense stayed within its baseline instead of pushing beyond it. The framework functioned, but it rarely lifted the roster to a higher tier. At the same time, the financial commitment shaped roster flexibility. Allocating resources became more restrictive, narrowing the margin for error when injuries or depth issues appeared. The team remained competitive throughout the experiment, but never consistently broke through. There was no collapse. The project simply settled slightly below the level the investment was meant to reach. 49ers Jimmy Garoppolo bet. San Francisco's 2017 trade for Jimmy Garoppolo immediately shifted the direction of the franchise. At the time, the team lacked identity and stability at quarterback. Garoppolo, coming from New England, carried intrigue built on limited but impressive appearances. Once he took the field, the impact was immediate, as the offense gained rhythm and the team closed the season with a strong finish. That short stretch created belief that he could accelerate the rebuild. The organization followed with a significant extension, committing to him as the centerpiece of Kyle Shanahan's system. Within that approach, built on timing, play action, and precise reads, he functioned effectively when the surrounding pieces aligned. The approach reached its peak during the 2019 season. With a dominant defense and balanced offense, San Francisco advanced to the Super Bowl, operating exactly as designed. However, even during that run, a question remained beneath the surface. Could the quarterback elevate the team when structure broke down? That tension defined the long-term evaluation. Injuries disrupted continuity, and in moments requiring extended playmaking, results became less consistent. The team could win with him, but there was uncertainty about winning because of him. That distinction eventually led the organization to explore alternatives, showing that success within an approach doesn't always equal full confidence in the position. Eagles' Carson Wentz collapse. Philadelphia used the second overall pick in 2016 on Carson Wentz, with a clear focus on locking in long-term stability at quarterback. He brought size, arm strength, mobility, and a competitive edge that suggested he could grow into a defining player for the franchise. By 2017, that projection was not only materializing, it was accelerating faster than expected. During that season, Wentz performed at an elite level, combining pocket control with off-script creation. The offense was dynamic, the team was winning, and he was widely considered an MVP frontrunner. Everything about the trajectory pointed toward sustained success until a late-season injury abruptly changed the course. After returning, flashes of that level remained, but consistency began to fade. Physical limitations affected mobility, altering how he navigated pressure. At the same time, the structure around him shifted as the roster evolved, creating a less stable environment. The balance between improvisation and system execution never fully settled again. The most significant change came in decision-making. Instead of operating within rhythm, he often pressed for bigger plays, holding the ball longer and forcing difficult throws. Turnovers increased, efficiency dropped, and by 2020, the decline was clear. What made this case striking was the speed of the shift, from MVP-level play to instability in a short span, showing how quickly a trajectory can change when multiple factors align negatively. Browns' Baker Mayfield era. Cleveland held the first overall pick in 2018 and chose Baker Mayfield in a move that carried emotional weight beyond a standard draft decision. The franchise had cycled through quarterbacks for years, searching for stability. Mayfield arrived with confidence, accuracy, and a commanding presence developed at Oklahoma, making him a candidate not just to fill the role, but to reshape the organization's direction. That impact was immediate. Once he took over as starter, the offense gained energy, and the team showed visible improvement. He set a rookie touchdown record and brought a level of belief that had been missing. The narrative quickly shifted toward a culture change, with Mayfield representing a new identity built on confidence and competitiveness. Sustaining that momentum proved more difficult. Coaching changes introduced constant adjustments, forcing him to adapt to different systems rather than develop within one. That instability affected mechanics and decision-making, leading to inconsistency in accuracy and performance. While the roster improved, his development never fully stabilized alongside it. In 2020, under a more organized approach, the team found success, reaching the playoffs with a scheme that emphasized balance and play action. That stretch showed what the partnership could look like when conditions aligned. However, it also highlighted limitations. When asked to elevate beyond the framework, results were uneven. Injuries made evaluation more difficult, and over time, the organization pivoted, recognizing that he pushed the team forward but was not the piece to take it further. Bears' Trubisky decision, picking the wrong QB. Holding the second overall pick after a trade-up in 2017, Chicago selected Mitchell Trubisky in a decision. To secure him, the Chicago Bears gave up assets signaling strong conviction in his projection. At North Carolina, he showed athleticism, arm talent, and flashes of accuracy. But his limited starting experience meant the evaluation leaned heavily on potential rather than sustained production. The plan centered on development within a defined system. Coaches designed an approach that simplified reads, incorporated movement, and allowed gradual growth. Early signs suggested it could work, particularly during the 2018 season when the team, backed by a dominant defense, reached the playoffs. Within that controlled environment, he produced efficiently enough to support success. Even during that stretch, limitations were visible. The offense functioned best when everything aligned: strong defense, effective running game, and carefully designed plays. When situations required him to create beyond the scheme or consistently deliver under pressure, results became less reliable. As more film accumulated, opponents adjusted, forcing tighter reads and more complex decisions. That's where progression stalled. Accuracy inconsistencies became more noticeable, decision-making fluctuated, and the offense struggled in obvious passing situations. At the same time, the success of Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson reframed the evaluation, turning the decision into a comparison rather than an isolated case. Over time, the gap showed as the projection never fully turned into consistent control at the position.
The Houston Texans' Bill O'Brien era. Houston's decision to hire Bill O'Brien initially appeared stable. He brought experience from structured systems and was expected to provide organization and consistency. Early results supported that belief, with the team remaining competitive and reaching the playoffs multiple times, especially after drafting Deshaun Watson, who added playmaking ability to the offense. The project shifted when O'Brien's influence expanded beyond coaching. As he gained control over personnel decisions, the approach shifted from collaborative to centralized. Instead of balancing coaching responsibilities with front office evaluation, both roles were concentrated in one position, increasing the impact of each decision. At first, the roster remained competitive, but the approach gradually became more aggressive and less sustainable. The most significant turning point came with the trade of DeAndre Hopkins, a central offensive piece whose production and reliability were not replaced with equivalent value. Combined with other moves involving draft capital, flexibility began to disappear. As those decisions accumulated, the roster weakened, and balance across units declined. Performance followed that trend, with the team struggling to maintain previous levels of success. This era was shaped less by one mistake and more by how multiple decisions compounded without adequate internal checks. The approach that was meant to provide consistency became too concentrated, leading to long-term decline. The Houston Texans' Jack Easterby era. Following the previous phase, Houston entered a period defined less by control and more by uncertainty. Jack Easterby emerged as a highly influential figure despite not coming from a traditional football operations background. His role evolved over time, but the organization lacked clear boundaries around decision-making authority. That lack of clarity became the defining issue. Instead of a clearly organized hierarchy with defined responsibilities, the team operated with overlapping influence. Communication and direction became less transparent, and the framework that typically guides roster building and coaching alignment appeared inconsistent. At the same time, existing roster problems had not been resolved. Limited draft capital and reduced flexibility made rebuilding difficult, yet there was no clearly defined long-term plan. The situation at quarterback further complicated matters, as Deshaun Watson became disconnected from the organization, removing a key pillar from the team's foundation. On the field, inconsistency showed through performance. Without cohesion or clear direction, the roster lacked balance and depth, making sustained competitiveness difficult. What defined this era was the absence of a consistent framework guiding decisions. Without a clear framework, even strong individual moves couldn't create lasting progress. The Detroit Lions' 0-16 season. By the start of the 2008 season, Detroit was already dealing with long-term inconsistency, but what followed went far beyond a typical rebuilding year. The roster lacked balance. The team had no clear identity, and previous seasons had not established a foundation strong enough to support recovery. Still, there was no expectation that the year would become historically significant. From the opening weeks, the issues were clear across every phase. The offense struggled to sustain drives, the defense had difficulty containing opponents, and special teams provided little relief. Instead of competitive losses,
Many games revealed a consistent gap between Detroit and its opponents, making it difficult to build momentum. Quarterback instability played a central role. The team rotated through options without finding consistency, leaving the offense without direction. Turnovers increased, execution broke down, and the inability to control tempo affected every part of the unit. On the other side, the defense struggled in key situations, failing to generate stops when needed. As losses continued, the season shifted from poor performance to historical pressure. The focus moved from improvement to avoiding a winless record, but visible progress never appeared. When the season ended at 0-16, it marked a unique level of collapse. The result did not stem from a single failure, but from overlapping issues in roster construction, coaching, and execution that broke down simultaneously. The Cleveland Browns' 0-16 season. Less than a decade after Detroit's winless season, Cleveland reached the same record, but under a completely different philosophy. Rather than a straightforward collapse, it was a roster formed through a deliberate long-term rebuild. The front office committed to accumulating draft capital, clearing contracts, and prioritizing future flexibility over immediate competitiveness. The idea was to reset everything at once, accepting short-term losses in exchange for a stronger foundation later.
That approach can succeed, but only when balance exists between losing and development. Cleveland struggled to maintain that balance. The roster lacked proven veterans at key positions, particularly at quarterback, where the team rotated through multiple starters, including Deshaun Kaiser, none of whom provided consistency. Without consistent leadership at that position, the offense lacked direction, struggled to sustain drives, and failed to establish any reliable rhythm across games. What made the season especially painful was how often the team stayed competitive. Many matchups were close, with Cleveland within reach late in games. However, the same pattern repeated: missed opportunities in critical moments, breakdowns in execution, and an inability to finish drives or secure defensive stops when needed. Rather than being outclassed weekly, small errors built up over time, leading to a cycle where effort did not convert into results. As losses continued, the season shifted from rebuilding to historical pressure. Each game became less about progress and more about avoiding a winless record. The long-term plan remained intact, but the present lacked enough organization, leadership, and cohesion to support development. When the season ended at 0-16, it became more than a statistic. It showed the limits of a rebuild pushed too far, where sacrificing competitiveness removed the environment needed for growth. The Antonio Brown Raiders experiment. The Raiders traded for Antonio Brown in 2019 with the intent of immediately transforming their offense. Brown had been one of the most dominant wide receivers in football during his time in Pittsburgh, known for elite route precision, separation, and consistent production. The expectation wasn't gradual integration, it was instant impact, with Brown acting as the focal point of the passing game and elevating the entire unit. That vision depended heavily on timing and preparation. Training camp and preseason are where quarterbacks and receivers develop chemistry, refine route timing, and build trust within the framework. For a player expected to carry the passing game, those reps are essential. Instead of building that foundation, the situation quickly shifted away from football, disrupting the entire process before it could stabilize. A series of off-field issues became the central focus almost immediately. Rather than integrating into the offense, Brown remained disconnected from it, creating constant uncertainty around availability. The team couldn't plan consistently, and the offense couldn't evolve with him as its primary weapon. What was supposed to be a structured addition turned into ongoing disruption that affected preparation across the roster. The situation escalated to the point where the Raiders released him before he played a regular season snap. That outcome makes this case unique among failed projects. There was no gradual decline, no system mismatch, and no performance evaluation, because the experiment never reached the field. It failed at the earliest possible stage, showing that talent alone cannot create impact without alignment, preparation, and consistency. Falcons post, 28-3 collapse.
For Atlanta, the defining shift did not come from years of decline. It came from a single game that altered everything. In Super Bowl 51, the Falcons built a 28-3 lead against New England, controlling the game through offensive efficiency and defensive execution. Matt Ryan operated at a high level, the scheme created consistent mismatches, and the team looked fully in control with a clear path to a championship. What followed was a dramatic reversal. New England adjusted, increased pressure, and forced Atlanta into more difficult situations. Drives that had been efficient earlier in the game began to stall, and opportunities to maintain control, running the ball, managing the clock, simplifying decisions were missed. Instead of closing the game, the Falcons allowed momentum to shift, leading to one of the most significant comebacks in league history. The impact extended far beyond that result. In the seasons that followed, the team struggled to replicate the same level of balance and consistency. The offense remained capable, but the overall structure changed. Defensive issues became more pronounced, roster adjustments affected continuity, and the system that had once produced elite results no longer operated at the same level. What makes this case particularly compelling is that it was built on success that couldn't be sustained. The Falcons reached the highest stage and demonstrated they could control it, but after that moment, the trajectory shifted. Whether due to adjustments, personnel changes, or the lingering impact of that loss, the team never fully returned to that version of itself, showing how a single moment can reshape a franchise's direction. Cowboys, always close loop. Dallas has existed in a cycle defined not by collapse, but by repetition. The roster is consistently strong, featuring talent across key positions, supported by a quarterback in Dak Prescott, who can operate efficiently within a defined system. Entering each season, expectations remain high because the team appears complete on paper with few obvious weaknesses. During the regular season, that talent translates into production. The offense moves the ball, the defense contributes, and the team wins enough games to remain firmly in contention. The approach functions, the numbers support it, and the team consistently looks like it belongs among competitive teams capable of making a deep run. The pattern shifts in the postseason. As games tighten and margins shrink, execution becomes more critical. Instead of elevating in those moments, the same issues appear: situational decisions, clock management, and execution under pressure. The team doesn't collapse entirely, but it fails to take the next step, often exiting earlier than expected. Over time, that pattern defines the entire project. Each season follows a similar structure: strong roster, productive performance, high expectations, and an early exit. Coaching changes and adjustments have attempted to break the cycle, but the outcome remains consistent. This isn't instability, it's stagnation. And in a league where progress defines success, staying in the same place ultimately becomes its own form of failure. Tank for Trevor, when losing was the plan. During the 2020 season, Jacksonville entered a situation that quickly became tied to a phrase repeated across the league: tank for Trevor. The focus centered on Trevor Lawrence, a prospect widely seen as a rare quarterback talent. At Clemson, he combined size, arm strength, mobility, and consistent production, building a resume that positioned him as a potential franchise cornerstone before even entering the draft. The logic behind the idea was straightforward. In a league where quarterback play defines long-term success, securing the first overall pick offers access to players who can reshape an organization. For teams without consistency at that position, the opportunity carries enormous value. As the season progressed, Jacksonville's results aligned with that outcome, finishing with the league's worst record and earning the top selection. On the surface, the plan succeeded. The team secured the pick and selected Lawrence, completing the objective tied to that narrative. However, the consequences of a season built around losing remained. A roster shaped by consistent defeats lacks cohesion. Systems often remain unsettled, and the overall environment becomes difficult to immediately stabilize. Instead of stepping into a structured situation, a rookie quarterback enters a team still trying to define itself. That challenge became clear early. Lawrence arrived with expectations of immediate impact, but the surrounding conditions, coaching instability, shifting schemes, and the residual effects of a losing season created a difficult starting point. The project highlights an important distinction. Acquiring elite talent solves access, not development. Jacksonville eventually moved toward a more consistent direction, but the initial phase showed how hard it is to convert draft position into immediate success when the foundation around that player isn't fully established. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.